Hey guys, welcome to The Heat. Industrial England, 1870s. You're a puddler standing in front of a low, hissing, reverberatory furnace. Boots already hot before the rake even kisses iron. Pig iron goes in, cinder forms, carbon leaves, and what comes out, if you time it right, becomes the rails that stitch counties together and the plates that keep ships above their secrets. You'll hear about the boil, you'll see why boots smoke, and you'll understand why your eyes won't forgive you tomorrow. This is told from the floor, no gauze, no looking away. You'll feel the rod in your palms and the sting that rides sparks. We're moving fast because that door doesn't stay open long. If you enjoy this kind of misery, tap subscribe, tell me what time you're watching and rate the smell out of 10. Now set your heel on the cool brick, toe toward hell and breathe through your teeth. Work starts when the light hits your face and the light here is orange you can taste. Pre-dawn, the town is a smear of damp slate and gas halos, and you walk the same path everyone walks, past back-to-back houses, past laundry lines that lift like ghosts, into a fog that tastes like boiled coins. The works rises ahead in studs and stacks, the roof sawtoothed against a sky not done being night. A bell or the big whistle tells the neighbourhood what your lungs already know. Men peel off side streets carrying breakfasts inside their jackets, boots making dull decisions on cobbles. The gate yawns, a watchman nods because names don't matter at this hour, and the yard opens like a bruised field. Slag heaps crusted in last night's frost, puddles with oil or rainbows, wheelbarrows parked the way tired men park. You pass the roll shops rumble and the hammer houses bark, and the heat finds you before you earn it. You take your place among men funneling to their stations, shoulders already shiny with the sweat that comes from knowing what the day will ask. Someone laughs too loud about nothing, a patch on a crack you can't fix. By the time you reach the furnace aisle, your tongue feels like a coin left on the rail. Your hearth waits, a low arched mouth in a furnace wall, brickwork glazed to a brown shine, where breath has baked it for years. The slag door is a squinting lid you'll learn to read like a foreman's face. Bars, paddles, the rabble. Iron rods stacked upright in a corner like spears waiting on a bad idea. Hooks hang from a nail, tongs lean with scabbed jaws. The sand scoop sits in a bucket older than anyone here. Draft tugs at your clothes and talks down the flue in a hollow, throat-deep roar. You taste its message. Fuel's on, flames hungry, mind your stance. On the chalkboard, today's heats, a neat set of numbers pretending to plan. The floor under your boots is a patchwork of clinker and brick, brightened with flecks that didn't cool before they learned manners. You run a palm near the door and feel the hair prickle, a farmer's way of reading weather made of fire. Every scuff and notch on the floor is a footnote to a mistake, and you learn them the way a blind man learns a room. A dent in the threshold says a bloom fell here once, no one admits whose. Crew forms around sound. You are the puddler, keeper of this bath. The underhand, the boy, shadows your elbow, learning your wrists before your words. A shingler waits down range, where the bloom will become a screaming loaf under the trip hammer. Beyond, the roller crew moves like a single animal that learned to travel in loops. You trade nods because talking near a furnace is a game you always lose to the draft. The foreman's eyes carry chalk. He doesn't need a stick to mark you. Everyone knows where everyone stands because getting it wrong costs ankles. You plant your left toward the door, right ready to pull, and you fix your mind on a circle of metal that doesn't forgive mistakes with words. The hammer's dog bark punctuates orders you can't hear, and the squeeze press sighs like a tired horse. Your boy's eyes flick to your hands and back to the door, soaking up things he doesn't know he's learning. You remember the first time you stood here and how your knees tried to write their own excuses. Pay is piecework, and the numbers stare at you from the chalk like they're already angry. Today's heat schedule is a short promise written big. It will shrink as the hours lengthen. You lift the gauntlets, check the apron's ties, and feel the wool shirt already tacky with old sweat that dried into salt. Air here has a flavour. Coal gas and iron oxide with a back note of wet wool and tea from a tin too long used. First lesson to the boy isn't a sentence, it's where you put your feet. Second lesson is why boots smoke when slag flecks fall, steaming proof that leather and physics disagree. Third is that superstition is just what you call safety when you can't afford science. You slap your soles on the brick to wake the leather. A bucket squats by the post with rags gone grey from work and water, your only sunscreen unless you count stubbornness. Some men wear clogs, some hobnailed boots, all of them steam when the day gets personal. You nod to no one in particular and open the door a finger's width to let the light warn your eyes what comes next. You dress for heat by dressing against it, which is a joke the heat enjoys. The wool shirt is thick and coarse, soaked last night, and hung by the range so it dried to a crust that holds damp like a secret. It will steam before you do. The leather apron rides your ribs and hangs to the shin, scored with little comets where slag once kissed and cooled. Gauntlets stiff as bark live on a peg and crawl up your forearms until they find yesterday's burns and argue with them. On your feet, clogs if you trust wood to float you above sparks, hobnailed boots if you trust iron to bite brick. Either way, the soles are thicker than your patience and still not thick enough. Everything hums with the memory of 1,000 heats, and everything fits wrong on purpose so it can be thrown off fast if a bad second asks for more skin than you can spare. Uniform is too grand a word. It's a collection of apologies stitched together to keep your bones from learning the alphabet of scars. A damp rag waits in the bucket like a small mercy you have to make yourself. You fold it twice and lay it across the back of your neck, thread the tails under the apron straps and feel your skin register the cold as if it were a stranger. A brimmed cap keeps the glare from carving lines into your forehead, and a twist of cloth under the band catches the trickle from your hairline before it salts your eyes. Your eyebrows clump with dried crystals that sting before they save, and the lashes cake into little white fences you blink through until they melt. Boots smoke because they are ovens with feet in them, radiant load beating through leather, slag flecks landing like meteors and hissing judgment, wet soles steaming off last night's soak in a performance no one applauds. You stamp once, not to put anything out, but to remind your ankles they still belong to you, and the little cloud that lifts is your day's first weather report you can read without a clock. Tools go where your hand falls in panic. The rabble is your long iron rod with a blunt nose, the stick you use to pull, lift and fold the bath so it stays under the flame instead of in it. The paddle is flatter, good for gathering a sticky mass into something that might someday be a bloom without climbing out of the furnace to slap you. The slice is a narrow tongue of iron for cutting through crusts and persuading stubborn metal to stop pretending it is a rock. Hooks fetch what you drop and what the heat tries to keep. Tongs bite blooms that weigh like arguments. A sand scoop and a mill-scale shovel lean nearby, dull and gritty, your poor man's chemistry set for making the bath bite and clean. You lay them in a fan by the post and memorize the angle of each handle because when the door opens to the sun you keep inside, you will reach by feel, not by hope, and the right weight will already be in your palm. Safety starts as a map in your feet and ends as a superstition in your hands. Left foot to the cool brick, right foot ready to step if something pops. Weight low, shoulders square, chin turned so that your better eye stays outside the spark path. You test heat with the backs of your fingers because the fronts lie. And you never reach past the opening with your elbow exposed like a promise. Some men trim the fingertips off their left glove so they can feel the rod sing. Others refuse because feeling is how scars take attendance. You tap the rabble twice before the first pull, not for luck, just because a man did it on a day he didn't get hurt, and that's data you can use. You never step over a rod on the floor, you keep your mouth closed when you open the door, and you trust the knuckle that aches first because it has been right more often than your eyes. You blink on a count. Pull. Blink. Breathe. So sparks find lids, not pupils. And you keep your shadow out of the door's throat so the flame doesn't change its mind when you need it steady. Pockets are a ledger of needs. A twist of tea, a heel of bread wrapped in cloth, a lump of cheese that will sweat as hard as you do, a stub of pencil, a nail you meant to return. You check the apron ties again, cinch the gauntlets, and set the tools in a leaning fan so you can grab by memory when the door paints your sight white. The boy mirrors you badly, which is to say he mirrors you perfectly for his age, and you fix his cap brim with a thumb and a joke he'll remember, because it's not funny. He asks where to stand, and you answer by kicking his heel to the cool brick and pointing his toe toward the door like a compass that only knows south, then tap the toe twice as if that will convince the floor to stay solid. Uniform is a punishment you learn to deserve a little less each day, and the best thing it does is keep you from forgetting there's a faster way to be wrong, which is to hurry when the furnace wants respect. You lift the latch and the charging door throws its little tantrum, a shudder and a scrape that insists it never liked you and never will. Light pours out like a confession no priest could manage, and the breath of the furnace hits your face with a shove that tastes of coal and yesterday's scale. The boy props the door with the iron stay, eyes watering already, and you start feeding the pigs. Bars of crude iron slid in nose first, then shouldered along the hearth with the slice so they bed under the flame like livestock that know where the hay is. Cinder from the last heat gets shoved across to make a bed, a dirty blanket that will catch impurities when the bath begins to move. Each bar rings a note as it kisses the brick, and you hear whether the hearth is even or wearing a hollow. Draft tugs at your clothes, talks down the flue, and you answer with your stance braced and small, because the door never opens without trying to steal a piece of you. The heat reaches your boots first, and you smell damp leather changing into something that wants to be smoke. Shovel choreography begins. A scoop of mill scale, a shake of sand, another push of pig, and the backhand wipe that keeps sweat from blinding you at the worst possible second. Mill scale, black flaky oxygen you stole from the roll shop, goes in like seasoning on a meal you intend to fight. It bites the bath where the carbon still talks back and leaves a flavour you can work. Sand hisses and settles into the joints between bars, a gritty promise of cleaner slag that will flow instead of clinging like glue. You reared the flame by appetite, not by any clock. Sallow yellow when it sulks, steady white when it's hungry enough to behave, a sick green when gas pockets are ready to do something regrettable. The boy shuffles in the rhythm you set. Open, feed, slice, breathe, learning how not to step on the line of heat that runs out of the door like an invisible ditch. You set the rag on your neck more firmly, feel its steam, and let the cool creep down your spine long enough to think one useless thought. Sunscreen is the wet rag you forgot. The first glare of the charge is a clean hurt you never quite domesticate. Bright enough to wash the shop away and leave you alone with a circle of white that floats even after you close your lids. You squint until the world is a slit you can boss and start the colour litany again. Dull cherry at the shoulders where new pig sulks, orange where the roof's reflection bites, near white at the centre where the flame presses like a hand. Heat blooms across your lips and dries words into grit, so you tuck one corner of the neck rag between your teeth and drink the damp the way a man steals sips from a forbidden tap. Blink on the pull, you remind yourself, pull, blink, breathe, because lids catch sparks and pupils keep them. The boy copies the pattern with exaggerated care, and you find a second to tilt his chin away from the door, so his good eye sits outside the spit path. Counting by colour is counting by chance, but it's the clock you trust in a place that eats watches for breakfast. The furnace has moods you learn the way fishermen learn weather, by bones and teeth, not by sky. When the draft pulls too hard, you trim the firing and listen for the roar to settle. When it sulks, you tease the damper, a stubborn plate that answers in its own time, so you adjust your patience instead of your pride. Pig stacked too thick will sweat and sulk like a sullen team. Spread too thin and it flashes, spits and wastes, so you set the bars in a loose raft that creeps under the glare as a single creature. Cinder wants to crust early. You break it just enough to let the bath talk to air without letting air steal the heat you paid for with coal and breath. The slice whispers through scabs, the rabble noses a bar to heel, and the door relents a finger width so the draft doesn't turn fickle. When the flame begins to even, the sound changes from a hungry snarl to a steady speech, the kind that lets a man plan the next 2 minutes without lying to himself about the third. You and the boy move in the low dance charging demands, passing tools without looking, counting loads by how your shoulders complain instead of by chalk on a board. He keeps out of the triangle between you, the door and the post, a piece of geometry that saves ankles more reliably than sermons, and when he forgets, you thump his boot with the rabble so memory moves into leather. The rod hums in your palms, a thin song that tells you more than the foreman's voice ever could. Draft dipping, cinder thickening, pig beginning to relax. When the roar drops a pitch, you feel it in your wrist before you hear it. Step, adjust the stay, step back, and the breath of the furnace evens like a beast persuaded, not beaten. A last shake of sand, a final push to settle a stubborn bar, and the door comes down to its slitted frown. You breathe through your teeth to cool the tongue, roll the stiffness from your neck, and let the brightness fade enough that the rest of the shop returns. Hammer barking, squeeze press sighing, men talking in the grammar of coughs. Waiting is work, and it pays in burns you don't get. You check the flame like a doctor checks eyes. Yellow when the fuel sulks, steady white when the bath will listen. That treacherous hint of green, when gas gets trapped and starts making promises it intends to keep violently. The door stays slit, the draft writes its long sentence down the flue, and you stand where the heat stops wanting to own you. You sip weak tea by the slag door, metal on the tongue, steam on face, and the bread wrapped in your pocket tastes like coal dust pretending to be spice. There's talk about last week's jammed rolls and how long it took to pry a bent bar free. There's the quieter story about the sleeve that didn't come back and the man who pretends it was only cloth. The underhand watches your wrists more than your mouth. Instruction is the shape of your elbows, not the shape of your words. You plant heel on cool brick, toe toward hell, and practice the pivot that spends less of your back. Calisthenics for people who don't believe in leisure. Tea gone, you breathe through your teeth and count the flame's breaths, because patience is easier with arithmetic. You test the door stay, check the rake's head for a burr that could catch and make you choose between pride and skin, and touch the rag at your neck to see if mercy remains. The boy crouches to re-wet a cloth, and you stop him with a toe against his boot, slow, low, sideways when water lives within arm's reach of heat, because steam burns ask for nothing and take whatever is nearest. Across the shop, a shingler's laugh punches through the roar, a brittle sound that says a good heat is worth 2 jokes, but no more. You practice footwork again, left forward, right braced, weight in the knees, hips ready to give a little, and never too much. Eyes blink on rhythm, pull, blink, breathe, until the lids settle into their work and the hairs at their edge crisp the way grass does after a cruel noon. Of all your tools, timing is the only one you can't hang on a nail. The first stir is the breaking of a crust that would like to be a roof forever. You slide the rabble under the top skin and lever, patient and steady, until the iron starts to swim and the surface shifts from stubborn plate to something that flows if coaxed, not commanded. Sparks spit in tight, angry clusters, bees with a grudge when you angle your forearms so they have somewhere to die that isn't your cheek. Pull, lift, fold, always under the flame, never directly into it. Because the roof is where the work happens, and the bath beneath is where your day stops making sense if you let it scorch. Slag skin forms like fast ice. You push it toward the door in slow rakes that hiss like geese in a storm, piling it just inside the lip until it can be shoveled away without inviting a tantrum. Heat management becomes a song you sing with your shoulders. Short pulls to keep breath spare, long enough to move metal but not long enough to trade skin for pride. Eyelashes singe, you don't memorialize them. Muscle remembers what talk forgets. The rabble's nose finds the seam between pig and cinder, and you lift the heavier side just enough to let oxidizing bite where it must. The slice whispers through a scab that formed without permission, and the paddle settles a stubborn bar as if tucking a child that never sleeps. You feel the bath's mood through the rod, a faint hum that changes when the carbon begins to surrender, slower, thicker, more obedient, and you shift your stance by half a foot because that's where the floor taught you not to trip on your own plan. Around you, the shop's soundscape runs its loop, the furnace's constant sermon, the dog bark of the steam hammer, the sigh of the squeeze press, and the playing card rattle of rollers as they hunt their own rhythm. Men cough in punctuation you've learned to read as questions and answers. You good? I'm here. The foreman ghosts by, chalk eyes taking attendance without a word, and you keep the rod moving because stillness in front of open flame is just a polite way to invite regret to dinner. The bath turns from churlish to conversational, and that's when the real danger pretends it's help. Bubbles begin, first small, then pushing, then the kind that slap the surface and throw spit with no warning, proof the decarburization gases are finding their way out like thieves with hot hands. You read streaks as they travel from glassy to dull and know a pasty bloom is forming somewhere under your insistence. Not yet a ball, but yes, you're ready to be convinced. Blink on beat. Step to keep your shadow off the door and test the paddle's face against the bath's resistance the way a baker tests dough, seeking that sweet, sticky give that means you can start gathering without tearing the heat you paid for. You run a thumb against your gauntlet's seam, a habit and a timer both, and trade a glance with the boy that isn't a sentence but still teaches. When the surface breathes like this, keep your cheek out of the line of fire. Congratulations, you're nearing the part of the job where lava learns to juggle you back. The boil shows itself first as a tremor under the paddle, a hush in the roar, then a sudden breath from the bath like something alive trying to stand up under a too low roof. You ease the rabble's nose along the surface and feel the metal thicken, a slow pudding that resists, then yields, then fights again when gas tries to claw out. Blisters rise, little domes that flash and pop with wet slaps, and each carries spit you cannot predict, so you angle your forearms and turn the cheek you like least. The roof reflects a clean white, but the edges go a dangerous lemon, and you trim the firing a whisper, not to scold the flame, only to make it listen. The door narrows and the draft changes pitch. The boy hears it and tenses, the way a dog hears thunder before clouds remember their job. You keep the pull short and the fold tidy, always under the glare, never dragging the bath into the raw throat of the flame. Patience here is cheaper than pride, and both are cheaper than skin. Slag spits without warning, because warnings are for men with time, and the bath owes you none. A pop, a sting, a hiss that reads like mockery, and last week's mark on your cheek wakes up as if insulted by the new company. You tilt, blink on beater, and let the spit find leather, not lip, and the boy sees the angle you choose just before he would have chosen wrong. You remember the man who didn't angle, the sound he made more surprise than pain, and how the shop went quiet in a way nobody mentions now because talking is a kind of admission. The scoop waits. You rake a skin to the door, it piles and sags and sighs, and you push it out with the slice so it dies hissing on the bricks and doesn't cling to your plans. The foreman glances and moves on. There's nothing to write but time, and time already keeps its own cruel ledger. You reset feet, heel, toe, knees soft, shoulders low. The bath remembers your wrists, so you let it read them. Reading the bath is a grammar learned in burns and bought in breaths. Streaks travel from glassy quicksilver to a duller, honest grey, and the places where pig once sulked now move as one broad thought under the roof's persuasion. You test with the paddle's face and feel the bath push back with that sweet resistance that says, carbon is surrendering, oxygen is earning its keep, and your next mistake will be about timing, not chemistry. Smell shifts, less sulphury, more hot and clean, and the sound smooths into a steady sermon you can nod along to while your eyes keep counting colour. Straw at the edges, deeper orange where fresh cinder swam in to help, a near white centre steady as a held breath. You add a shake of scale, not enough to bully, just enough to keep the bite honest, and lay a lace of sand where slag wanted to root. The door stays at a slit that strings your vision down to a knife. You accept the tunnel and keep your world small. Big worlds get men hurt. Timing is a thief you try to hire before it robs you, and this is where you negotiate. Ball too soon and the bloom will be thin, wet with slag. Unwilling to take a hammer without weeping a fortune across the floor. Wait too long and the bath thickens into stubborn, tear-prone masses that break your back and your day in the same hour. You watch for the breath, those slow exhalations that lift the surface and set it down, with a patience you can match, and you feel the rod's hum settle into a note you've earned. The boy brings the paddle without a word, because habit is faster than speech when the door glares. You nod once, trim the fire another hair, and count 3 pulls, 3 blinks, 1 swallow of ragwater to keep the mouth from cracking open into a lesson. You let the cinder skim toward the door, yard it aside, and test again. The push now is heavy kind, not angry. The fold gathers instead of smearing, the roof's reflection holds. This is the tightrope between waste and weep. You choose. The paddle slides under the fattest, sweetest part of the bath and lifts, and the weight answers like a newborn bull, awkward, stubborn, full of unspent fight. You turn the mass in place to squeeze slag toward the edges, feeling it bleed in bright orange tears that run and hiss at the lip, and you keep the centre high so it doesn't flatten into grief. The boy braces the door, wide stance, shoulders back, eyes in the safe slice of dark you taught him to keep, and you gather, twist, shepherd the sticky globe into something like a ball that will suffer tongs without exploding your afternoon. The furnace growls, the roof holds, the bloom answers with that sweet, slow give that means it wants to be taken. A last rake to clear a path, a breath you don't admit you held, and you cradle the weight a fraction longer so the outside can skin and keep the inside from betraying you. Congratulations, you have, for the briefest shimmering moment, convinced a river to be held. You turn the bloom in the bath the way a miller turns a sack to settle flour, careful, owning the weight, squeezing out what doesn't belong. Each slow roll brings a bright weep of slag to the skin, and you nurse it toward the lip so it can hiss out its temper on the bricks, instead of poisoning your pay. Bullseyes lives in the chalk and in your shoulder both. Today's tonnage wants a globe stout enough to stand the hammer without scattering pride, not so fat it breaks the boy's stance or your back. He braces the door with his whole small future, knees bent, heel set on the cool brick you scuffed for him, and the furnace breathes like a bellows that learned manners for once. Time leans over your shoulder, next charge already feeling the roof's persuasion, and you taste the hurry that must not touch your hands. You quarter-turn the sticky mass, feel the sweet elastic give, and press a last bright tear to the lip. Now, gather, seat, lift. The bloom sits on your paddle like a sun that agreed to be held. Floor choreography takes over where muscle ends. The path from mouth to post is a corridor of near accidents mapped by scars you don't add to. You clear the sill with a slow, arrogant inch, rather than a quick foot you cannot spare twice, and you call the hook with a grunt the boy knows means close but not clever. The paddle slides, tongs arrive in the same breath, and iron jaws bite the bloom where you want them, not where they feel like, low enough to steer, high enough to carry, never so deep you bruise the core and invite a scream later. The door becomes a letterbox of white, and you keep your world inside it. Outside is a rumour of men and barking hammers that will not matter for 3 long heartbeats. Boots find the rectangles of clean brick the older men taught you to trust, and ankles stay out of the triangle between weight, door, and a post. Orange rain taps at your apron hem as the bloom drips its grief, and you move like a man who has learned that speed is a different word for regret. Tongs clamp, and the bloom begins its roll to judgment, leaving a tail of sparks like a comet that chose the wrong sky. You and the boy walk it low and sure, the way you'd carry a sleeping child made of argument, and then the shingler's world grabs it. A table of scale and oil, a squeeze press with a patient jaw, a trip hammer itching to pronounce sentence. He nods once, as if you've delivered a guest he expected but doesn't respect, and sets the mass beneath the hammer's black dog. The first blow lands like a door shut on a quarrel. The bloom flattens, squeals, and throws thin jets of slag that cut light into needles. You step wide of the spatter line without thinking, and your eyes take inventory from the edge, skinning clean, edges not folding, core still bright enough to speak. The shingler doesn't look at you because he doesn't need to. You brought him a conversation he can finish, and the hammer's punctuation is the only grammar anyone here trusts. The squeeze press leans in after the hammer, patient violence that wrings firewater from the loaf and pushes cinder to the edge where it can be shaved. With every crush, the bloom scream changes key, a music you learned to grade long before anyone gave you words for it. Too wet, still spitting. Better, fewer needles, good, that duller shout that means clean iron wants to be something. Slag arcs away in orange ropes that snap to black lace midair, and the floor writes a new layer of delicate ruin. You call the state of the piece without speaking, a tilt of chin, a small cut through the air that means turn, a palm that says hold. The shingler reads you because men who don't read each other here limp. Between blows there's the respect that lives in not wasting each other's seconds. His crew moves the screaming loaf to the rolls, their pride a low flame that never goes out. You register it and keep nothing of it, because you get paid by heats, not by songs. Path back to the furnace is uphill into noon, and your skin understands before your mind catches up. The world narrows to the white slit again. The roar folds around your head like a hood, and your hands reach for the tools that are already where panic will want them. You pass the roller crew's oil-bright dance and smell hot bearings, grease, adventure for other men. Then the hammer's bark becomes background and the draft reintroduces itself like a foreman with new rules. You slide the door a finger, monsieur, to feel the breath. Listen to the pitch of the flue and judge the hearth's temper as if it were a horse that remembers you. Next charge sits ready, pigs mustered like sullen soldiers, and the cinder bed waits to be persuaded into honesty again. You take one swallow of tea that tastes like a coin left in a kettle, retie a gauntlet thong with teeth because fingers have no argument left, and look at the boy. He's already set his heel on cool brick, toe to hell. Good, back in. Second heat, same lies. You charge again with arms that have already quit the job and left you holding their notice, and you don't let them. Pigs in, scale shaken, sand laced along the seams, the slice pushing a sulker into line. Your hands move before your thoughts remember the steps, which is the point. Micro-rituals fire in order. You dip the scarf ends, wring them once, relay the wet across the neck. You tap the rabble twice, along the post to hear the note you trust. You blink on the pull and breathe through your teeth on the fold. The door sits at a stingy slit, the draft writes its long essay, and the glare files your pupils down to needles. Soft flex of knees, hips elastic, shoulders low and stubborn. You taste metal on the steam and tea on the memory of your tongue. None of this earns applause, it buys you seconds that don't try to kill you in public. The heat pretends to be familiar and then remembers it like surprises. Fatigue compounds like interest at a bank that hates you. Salt rides sweat into every hangnail and burn edge, turning little wounds into small opinionated mouths. Cuffs ghost steam each time you lean near the door. The wool shirt stiffens into a tunic that belongs to someone braver. The boy misreads the flame, a pretty yellow that looks friendly and means nothing good, and you fix it without a lecture. One nod toward the damper, one palm down to slow his reach, a shoulder turn that says let the roof do it, not the throat. He copies the stance like an apprentice thief and the furnace finds its sermon again. You feel the rabble's hum through gauntlet leather, tiny tremors that tell truth faster than anyone's mouth. Cinder thickening on the left, a hollow starting at the back, the boil not yet brewing but promising. You keep the pulls short, the folds clean, the door mean. Your eyebrows clump with salt you pretend is strategy. Gallows humour ration. Congratulations, your skincare regimen is a bucket. The ledger in your head turns its pages while your hands refuse to look up. Heat's done. One good, one decent. Chalk says 6 to make the number. Shoulders say 5 will be an argument. The clock on the wall is coal and appetite. Coin imagined. Rent, boots, bread, the boy's tin whistle he saw in a window. Maybe a meat pie, maybe not. Deductions you haven't met yet sharpen their knives in the pay office. Fines for waste hang on hooks. You can see if you turn your head so you don't. You count by colour and by what hurts least. Straw at the lip, bright orange mid-bath. Centre driving toward the pail that lets you pretend time is an ally. You taste the air, less sulphur, more iron clean, and let yourself think 2 heats ahead in the quiet that lives between pulls. Piecework bribes a body to forget it has the limits. It's remarkable how often the bribe clears. Snap time arrives like a rumour with proof. 10 minutes, no more. And you sit on the low wall by the slag door with tea that learned penny flavours, and bread that took a correspondence course in soot. Cheese sweats into your thumb, and if luck visited yesterday, there's a corner of the meat that will forgive your teeth. Words finally work where flame isn't. Gossip about the rolls jamming last week and how 3 men, 3 bars and a priest's vocabulary couldn't persuade the bar to forgive geometry. Mutter about open-hearth across the county. Siemens-Martin with its big basins and slow patience that some say will eat Puddling's wages and others say will eat Puddling whole. A man shows a burn scar the way a fisherman shows weather. Palm out, joke on top, warning underneath. Someone chuckles too hard and coughs the laugh in half. Steam from the tea fogs your cap brim. It smells faintly of home and more strongly of the shop, pretending to be gentle for once. You stand because sitting grows spikes if you overstay. Wrists stretch until gravel answers. Fingers open and close like hinges that could use oil but will settle for heat. You flex the ankles, feel leather grumble, and retie a gauntlet thong with your teeth because teeth still volunteer. The boy folds his rag, straightens nothing that matters, and asks nothing he can learn faster by watching. You pass the big hammer and the squeeze press on the way back. Their music is mid-sermon, promising a rail that will sing later under wheels you'll never ride. You pick up your tools where panic will want them, check the door in a private motion that's become a prayer, and listen to the draft's note. It's the same work and not the same day. Tiny changes in breath, in colour, in how your shoulder admits the weight, and the repetition is its own kind of cunning. Back to the slit, back to the pull, back to the lie everyone here tells on purpose, just one more heat. The shop is an ecosystem with its own weather and a food chain nobody admits to. Foreman crosses the aisle with stopwatch eyes, chalk living behind his pupils instead of in his fist, and you can feel him adding or subtracting seconds when you so much as readjust a grip. The shingler's swagger lives in how he leans on the hammer frame, a man who can scold bad metal into good manners. The roller crew's pride is quieter, a ripple of synchronized hands and nods as bars return to their mouths and leave straighter. At your end, the underhand keeps silence, because silence is how you hear what the flame intends. Hierarchy here isn't shouted. It's measured in who stands closest to danger and how calm they look while doing it. The floor keeps score, paths rubbed bright by men who always finish, scuffed detours where somebody learned to limp. By the pay window, outsiders would call you one shop, but in the glow you are neighbouring countries sharing a border of sparks and an agreement not to waste each other's breath. You all serve the furnace, but the furnace serves nobody, and that is the order everyone believes in. Politics live in pockets as much as in the pay office. Piecework makes friends until the chalk says otherwise. It puts the smell of competition under the smell of coal, and you learn to weigh every joke for iron before you toss it. The truck shop waits by the gate with bacon that tastes of debt, boots you don't quite own, and a ledger that remembers what you try to forget. The market stall across the lane offers cheaper truth if the shift ends in time. Fines for lateness sit in a little book that can turn a good week into an apology. Fines for waste sit in your head long before the foreman writes them. The boy learns the currency fast. A minute saved at the door spends as a bruise later. A careful rake pays as a smaller bill in slag. A needless word buys you nothing. In corners out of the draft you hear union whispers, names of clubs, a room that smells of soap, a strike that won less than the songs. You half believe, which is to say you want to, and still you go back to counting heats because rent speaks louder. Water has rules here that are older than any posted on a wall. Quench barrels squat like sleeping oxen along the aisle, and when a skin of slag kisses their surface, the shop answers with a pop, a drumbeat that says someone misjudged a path by half a step. Steam is worse than flame because it doesn't ask permission. It enters sleeves, crawls under aprons, lifts rags, and takes what it wants before anyone can name it. You move water slow, low, sideways, bucket tilted so the lip skims, never pours because a sudden sheet becomes a white hand that grabs everything. Men who forget get written on, forearm skulls in lace patterns, a neck welt shaped like a question, a cuff welded to skin before anybody could swear enough to unmake it. The boy learns to set the bucket on brick and nudge it with a boot as if it were a nervous dog. He learns not to dash a rag, but to feed it like bread to a hot mouth. Every hiss has a meaning, and the worst one is the quiet after a big one, when everybody counts fingers without looking. Eye care is a rag dunked in a blackened bucket older than you, and you become priest and patient both. Between pulls you press wet cloth to lids that feel salted and smoked, blinking into darkness that blooms green, then orange, then back to ordinary hurt. The water goes grey, then black. The rag goes sour, and still it is the best mercy the aisle offers that doesn't cost coin. A near miss writes its sermon 2 furnaces down. The floor sings a new rubbery note, and a man looks down to see the sole of his boot parting from the leather, like peeling bark. He takes the step he shouldn't. The hot flap kisses brick, and the steam that erupts slaps his calf clean of hair, a handprint no one envies. You move him sideways into the wind of the flue where cool lives tear the laces with a hook and feed his ankle water in small stubborn sips. Afterward he laughs too hard and says he needed new boots anyway, which is how men tell each other they still belong to their feet. By late morning the aisle smells sharper, as if the iron has moved from sulking to speaking, and the shop is listening whether it wants to or not. You read flame-like handwriting from a friend who never learned letters properly. Straw along the lip where fresh air sneaks in and does you a favour. True orange, where the bath's patience thickens into something you can gather. Near white pooled under the roof's reflection, proof the roof is earning its keep. Ears join eyes. A duller thud from the hammer means the bloom is workable. A brighter squeal means somebody hurried. Smell tells too. Sweet metallic when decarburization sings, bitter sulphury when the coal asks to be noticed for the wrong reason. You shake a skin of mill scale when the bath turns slippery with pride, lace sand when slag tries to root, enrich the cinder when it feels thin and lazy. Pride here is saying nothing and doing it right twice, once for the shop that sees, once for the rail that will never know your name. Heat turns your body into equipment you must maintain on the fly. Pulse drums in your ears until it feels like the flue moved inside your skull. Skin crusts with salt that stings open the knuckles and draws little maps on your forearms. Lips crack. Tears gone. You still damp from the rag and pretend it's mercy. Hands blister, then toughen, then blister again, where the rabble's shaft chews through leather and habit. Breathing becomes a craft, short through teeth on the lift, longer on the fold, a held pause while the roof speaks, then out through a smile that isn't won when you rake the skin aside. You pace to the strip of cool brick, count 6 heartbeats, and return before bravery gets ideas. Knees stay soft, hips spare, shoulders low. You spend effort like coin, small and often, because big purchases bankrupt wrists. Heat management is a schedule nobody wrote, and your wage packet is the calendar, that thin envelope deciding where endurance ends and folly begins, and charging interest if you confuse the two. Hunger lies about time, so you feed it rules. 2 mouthfuls of bread when the door is shut. 1 sip of kettle coin water when the flame reads steady. Never eat square to the slit, because men who faint forward get remembered badly. When greyfish swim across your vision, you step back and talk to the flue with your back turned, a compromise between pride and sense. Sweat pools in your boots. Between pulls you lift a heel so it drains toward the instep and doesn't boil when a fleck lands. Keep teeth together so grit doesn't grind your tongue. Pinch salt from your brow before it blinds you. The boy mimics all this like a hymn. You correct a hand, nudge a stance, and let him think the lesson came from the furnace. Cramps arrive like letters you didn't want. You answer by opening and closing fingers around the rabble, until the writing softens, by flexing calves against the apron's hem, by rolling shoulders 1 notch at a time. You count 6 heartbeats at the cool brick and return before numbers tilt. Congratulations, your fitness plan is surviving until tea cools. Night crew stories walk the aisle. There was the man who worked through a fever because rent kept better time than doctors. He said he saw angels in the slag and they told him when to pull, which is the kind of religion the pay office respects. Another fellow earned his nickname by catching a falling bloom with a hook in his knee. He still walks, but the knee argues every damp morning. Superstitions make a scaffold where rules are thin. You spit twice before the boil, you never brag on a good heat. You knock the rabble on the post 2 times and not 3, because 3 was the number a man used on the day he didn't come back. Snap decisions live in these tales, the step that saved an ankle, the reach that didn't, the moment a man learned not to laugh with his mouth open in front of the door. You listen, nod, and pretend history is instruction instead of warning. The aisle writes nicknames in chalk you can't erase. Sooty Tom, Angel Jack, 3-Tap Bill. Each name is a sermon in 10 words, and the moral is always the same: learn faster than fire. You inherit technique the way other trades inherit tools. An old puddler taught you the dead man's pull without calling it that. Slide the rabble under the crust, lift just enough to invite air, then roll your wrist so the skin breaks along the fold you intend, not along the crack the bath wants. He never explained it. He showed you twice and watched your boot find the right brick. Another ghost left you a stance, a quarter turn that lets a spit glance off your jaw instead of biting your cheek, and you use it now without saying his name. Some moves travel faster after funerals, the low reach with the left hand when the right tires, the habit of setting the paddle down facing home so a stumble doesn't spear a shin, the way you share only as much wisdom as a man can carry in 1 safe step. You also learn what not to do. Never lay a wet rag on the sill where it will steam to a trap, never leave the scoop's mouth facing the door, never trust a clean floor because it means the last accident was thorough. Safety is a superstition that works, you believe it. Output is the part of pride the shop allows in daylight. You watch your iron leave your hands, screaming first under the hammer, then singing thin at the rolls, a bar pulled long as a promise and just as likely to be broken by people you'll never meet. Oil smells sweet and dirty at once. Steam rises in clean sheets. The crew feeds the mouth and swallows what comes out as if the machine were a tame god. A rail takes the mill's stamp with a dull kiss and becomes a line on a map you will never own. Somewhere a bridge begins with your shoulder. Somewhere a ship's plate forgets the heat that made it. Rails stack in the yard like sentences waiting for a reader, each end stamped with your mill's letters and a month that will outlive you. You touch one with a gloved hand when nobody's watching, as if checking a pulse, and feel only cold promise. Then you put the glove back where panic will want it and go earn the next initial. Leaving the glow for the grey is like stepping from a furnace into a dream where colours forgot their names. The slit goes dark, the door clapped shut, and your pupils argue about size like 2 foremen with different ledgers. Outside the bay, the air feels thin, almost shy. It doesn't push your chest, it just waits to be borrowed. Your shirt, Salt stiff, cools in brittle stages, and each breeze sketches a new map on your skin. You smell coal in everything, brick, wool, even your own hair. But the bite softens once the roof isn't shouting at you. The yard is a geometry of heaps and rails and puddles that keep the last of the day's colour, orange smears that hold on longer than sense. You walk slower than a man who's late and faster than a man who's finished, because the clang is still ringing, and if you stop it might catch you. You tell yourself you're only getting distance so the heat can't find your name again. The truth is you like pretending the world isn't a door you have to keep opening. Streets meet you with cobbles slicked in soot dew, grass nowhere, windows filmed in honest grime. Beerhouse light drips from a doorway like a promise that knows exactly what it is worth, and men lean into it as if the sun forgot them personally. The blacksmith's place has gone quiet. The tinman's backroom clicks as sheets cool. A cart's wheel stutters against a stone and the horse registers the complaint with a toss you envy. Laundry lines sag between back-to-backs. Shirts and chemises all the same colour eventually. A woman steps aside without looking because she knows the stride of factory men and the smell of hours. Children orbit the curb with a hoop and a stick, careful not to carom into boots that might lift without patience. You cross in front of the chapel where a bell tries to instruct the evening on how to be quiet. The sound bounces off rows of brick and loses, and you are grateful because silence feels like a trick you're not ready to learn. Hands keep buzzing like you're still holding the rod, nerves replaying the shift whether you asked for the encore or not. Palms itch under old blisters you forgot to notice while the door was open. Now they send minutes back in little telegrams. Pull, blink, breathe. You flex them because pretending helps. Shoulders announce every stare. Knees file a small complaint against the day's ledger. Your back insists it requested a transfer that never went through. In your mouth, the taste of iron fades to something like a penny sucked too long by a child who can't afford sweets. The town's air offers other notes. Soap from a yard where a woman boils a week out of collars. Onions from a pot that would like to be stew. The tired smoke of chimneys that have done nothing all day but make roofs honest. A dog considers you and decides you are furniture in motion. Somewhere a piano phrases 3 uncertain bars, a tune trying to remember itself, and you think of the rolls singing thin as the shop pulled iron into lines for other people's songs. The beerhouse is a room where men try to trade stories for forgetfulness and get shortchanged with pleasure, which is still a bargain. You go because coins feel heavier before they leave you and because bread tastes better after quarrelling with a pint. 2 mugs in, the clang in your bones moves back a chair, 3, and it pretends to step outside for a smoke. You keep to the wall because you already stood in front of one kind of fire and don't need another at your back. Talk is broad, weather, wages, the foreman's blink, then tight, a near miss, a boot sole that left a man mid-step, the rumour of open hearth that keeps putting teeth on younger men and taking them from older ones. Somebody sings half a verse off-key, somebody else supplies the key as if generosity were a tool you could keep sharp. You drink slow because nothing good ever happened fast after heat, and you leave before the room forgets names and starts inventing saints. The walk home resets with smaller promises. You count the 6 cracked flags between the lamppost and the corner, because counting is gentler than remembering. You touch the brick at the alley mouth the way a sailor touches a mast before sleep. Houses breathe coal, curtains breathe gossip. You breathe like a man carrying something you refuse to put down. In your pocket, the week's plan is a list of nouns: bread, coal, soap, maybe boots, maybe meat. In your head, rails run away from the mill in straight sentences, writing over hills you'll never climb. You stand outside your own door half a beat longer than you meant to, because the threshold is the only place in the world that asks nothing except that you cross it. You weigh bread against beer one last time and fail with grace, which is to say you open the latch and decide to be the kind of man who brings his heat home and sets it down where the kettle can't find it. The galvanized tub comes in like an old soldier dragged out of retirement, dense telling stories you never asked to hear. You haul it to the hearth and the kettle empties like a blessing with a handle. Steam rising in slow white ghosts that curl along the mantel and make saints out of nails. Shirts come off with that ripping sound salt-stiff cloth makes, and your skin, asleep in grime, wakes in lines of fire the second water touches it. Soap smells like a cousin of the factory, and tallow and lye and something sharp that remembers barrels, and it scrapes a day off one square at a time. You lower yourself until knees remember they bend, hiss air through your teeth, and accept that comfort isn't the point. Function is. Soot streaks the water in constellations you could chart, and your hands reappear from their dark gloves as if auditioning for honest work. Gallows quip rationed. Welcome to the spa where the masseuse is a brick and the towel's a prayer. Skin stings, then breathes. The pain steps back and leaves a hum in the pores as if every hair grew ears. You soap the forearms where Sparks wrote their initials, scrub under nails that kept half the shop for souvenirs, and tip your head to let hair drink heat before it remembers it's allowed to be clean. The water goes from tea to porter to ink. You swirl it and the surface becomes a mirror that returns a face you know by weight more than by features. Your wife has laundry rituals, shirts soaked in a wash tub that creaks like an old pew, cuffs turned, collars worried, knuckles beating mercy into cloth until the day lifts off in grey ropes. The soap she uses smells like the one in your tub, a cousin by marriage to coal. Your child appears at the doorframe, laughs at the steam halo above your head, and you pretend it's a crown because he deserves a king who can be silly after the fire asks for most of you. You sit long after the heat goes polite, elbows on the rim, water cooling from the conversation to judgment. The house breathes coal through the grate and onion through the door to the scullery. Neighbours breathe through bricks, coughs, a snatch of song, the quick hush of a quarrel ending in a kettle's clank. Back-to-back rows share everything except luck. Walls draft gossip that travels faster than smoke. Floors keep secrets in splinters, and stairs that know who drinks and who prays. Supper is stew thick as conversation. A pot that has known better meat but learned to be interesting. And bread you don't slice so much as saw, each stroke a small negotiation. The lodger snores several doors down and somehow still uses your pillow. The baby next house Ovirth barks a winter cold into the alley, and the sound bounces until even the cat looks offended. You towel off in stages, as if returning to skin were a task that required signatures, and dressing clothes less clean than you are, which passes for victory. Sunday is mending even when the calendar says otherwise. Boots get turned on your knee, you inspect the welt where soul threatens to file for divorce, thread waxed and mean-pinched between teeth, all pricked through leather that once believed it was tougher than fire. Soles, both kinds, require patching. Yours in quiet, the family's in steady chores that pretend not to be saving anyone. Your wife darns with a rhythm a shingler might respect. You oil the apron, where Sparks tried to autograph. Patience gets the same treatment. A neighbour boy stops at the threshold with questions packaged as awe. Is the fire tall as a man? Do the sparks sting like bees? Does iron shout? You answer carefully because you're curious. Truth is not the same as bravery. Yes, yes, and sometimes it screams, but you hand him the safe parts first. How to stand, where to put a heel, why you keep your mouth shut when doors open. You add a joke he'll remember, so the stance stays in his feet when fear fogs his head. Rooms that breathe coal are honest rooms. They don't pretend the world is scented with lavender, unless a cart spilled near the chemist's. You sit by the range with a mug that tried to be tea, and listen to the mill as if it were only wind from miles away. Your child climbs your knee with the solemnity of a man mounting a horse. He rides the minute until your thigh registers complaint, and then laughs as if he invented gravity. Curtains move with neighbours' stories. Your own windows sweat a little and cool like a brow after fever. You put the tin cup with its old dent back on the mantel and decide not to hammer it out because floors that lasted this long earned a vote. Night shoulders the lane, and houses nod to one another with lamplight and the agreeable ache of ordinary fatigue. You let the last heat leave your hands, not with a sermon, just with a breath. And the quiet that follows feels like a friend who doesn't ask questions. Payday arrives thin as paper and heavy as need. The queue outside the office is a rope of men that tightens without moving, each pair of shoulders holding its own arithmetic. The foreman stands behind the window with a ledger that watches you arrive, and the pay clerk's pen scratches like a rat in a wall. When your turn comes, the envelope feels theatrical, weight pretending to be more than sound, and you tuck it into the apron pocket as if it might evaporate in air not yet earned. Piecework pays in bursts and gulps. Good weeks feel like mercy, bad ones like a sermon you didn't attend. The clerk says your name without looking up, 2 syllables that could belong to any man in line, and you move aside because a doorway is not a place to count hope. Outside, men tear the gummed flap with the same careful aggression that they use on a stubborn bolt, and silver shows its faces in shy moons. You listen for the clink you expect, the whisper of note against note, and you let the sound decide what kind of father, lodger and debtor you'll be, until Friday remembers you again. Deductions arrive first because dignity likes an audience. Fuel or waste, a bell you swear you didn't miss, a smear on the ledger that means shop time at your rate. There's a tool charge for a handle you don't remember breaking and a towel fee you do, because the rag you love died a hero's death against an ill-timed spit. Fines blink up at you in neat sums that feel like sarcasm. You peel coins to the side for rent, for coal, for bread, for the boy's boots in a month that keeps the threatening to arrive early. You keep a thin stripe of notes flat as rail under your thumb, a promise to the grocer who doesn't ask questions he can't eat. The remainder, which thinks it is larger than it is, warms in your palm like courage. You tip 2 shillings to the boy, he pockets one and palms the other back when your wife isn't looking, which is its own economy. Off to the side, a notice invites economical suggestions. You consider longer Sundays and shorter chimneys, then save the handwriting you own for your own ledger. The pay office door keeps swinging and men exit rehearsing jokes that were supposed to feel like victories. A mate shows a coin and a gap where 2 should be and spits a philosophy about patience that sounds like he learned it from a wall. Another counts twice, shrugs once and buys a pint for the man behind him because some mathematics refuse to live on paper. You let the envelope ride your palm, shuffle coin from note by touch, and drop a rent packet into its folded grave. A chalk mark reminds you which money belongs to coal, which to bread, which only pretends to belong to you. A woman at the yard's edge sells onions and laughter. You buy the onions and leave the laughter for later. A cart rattles past with scrap. Scale flakes drift like black confetti that forgot the celebration. You tuck the envelope deep, a small bird you are allowed to rescue and expected to feed. You tell yourself you are calm because calm is cheaper than proud, and you stand in the lee of the weighhouse to wind your scarf and look less like a man deciding whether to be angry in public. Truck or market is a decision with a sermon at the end. The truck shop writes your name in a book that counts forward faster than wages and sells you bacon with a smile trained to resemble friendship. The market wants coin that clinks now and gives you cabbage that will surprise stew into being a better story. You weigh boots against coal, soap against sugar, coffee against the kind of sleep you can actually afford. The boy's eyes find the whistle, and he does not ask. He has learned the grammar of pockets. You pick a cabbage heavy for its size and a loaf that sounds right when thumped with 2 knuckles, a test as old as your mother's hands. You trade nods with a collier counting arithmetic in dust and with a roller whose shift speaks for him. On the way out, you swap a word about wages that isn't about wages. It's about being tired in the exact same place every week. The stall's mud takes prints you'd rather not sign, and still you sign them, because dinner is a contract too. Evening spreads like a bruise, and you count again by different light, stacking coins into towers that list like ships. Rent first because roofs fall hardest. Coal because cold is a creditor that never forgets an address. Bread because you can't eat pride unless you toast it, and you're short on pride. A small packet goes under the clock for boots in winter or boots tomorrow, depending on what the slag decides about your feet. Your wife taps each stack as if waking it, and marks the calendar with a dash that means coal paid and a small circle that might mean meat if nothing tears. You put a spoon of coins into a saucer behind the dented tin and call it savings because hope needs a noun. Then you eat stew that tastes honestly of cabbage and onions and a promise to try again on Monday, which is the closest thing to faith the lane can afford without passing as plate. The boy counts with you, whispering numbers like a spell. You let him end on 7 because it feels lucky, and because luck is cheaper than coal. After dishes, you flatten the envelope and keep it for lists. Rumour arrives on a handcart and unloads like scrap, piece by piece, loud when it hits the floor. Cross the river, they say. Siemens-Martin basins glow like calm moons. Open-hearth steel born in slow, patient baths that don't need a man to stand nose to fire and guess by colour. Old hands spit opinions into the ash. It's a fad with a ledger. It's progress with a payroll. It's the end of apprenticeships and the start of switch throwing. Young men do math with their thumbs and a pint. Fewer puddlers, more cranes. Fewer burns, more rules. The foreman's language gets careful. Adaptable men continue. Words that sound like doors that may or may not open when you press. You stand by the slit and listen to the draft because rumour never changed a flame's mind. Pride says Puddling fed the rails that braided counties and the plates that kept ships honest. Fear says there are quieter furnaces that will forget your name and payday the same afternoon. Gallows quip, rationed. Congratulations, your competition is a room that doesn't blink. At dinner pails, talk sharpens. Somebody's cousin went to look, big charging cranes, longer heats, a roof that throws its reflection into a lake of even damp fire, and men in cleaner shirts who still go home tired. The wage numbers travel like smuggled oranges, bright and not quite believable. Less guesswork, says one, with the tone of a man trying to sell himself peace. Less craft, says another, and you feel your wrists argue on reflex. You think of the boy beside you learning your hands by watching, and you imagine him watching a gauge instead, waiting for a pointer to excuse him from knowing. The truth, which resists choosing sides, arrives simple. Rails will still need making, ships will still need ribs, and somebody will stand close enough to heat to be reminded who is boss. You pour tea that tastes like old pennies and decide a plan you can actually afford. Work the day in front of you. Teach the stance anyway. The foreman, chalk-eyed, walks the aisle with a politeness you recognise from undertakers. Gentle, precise, and practised. He stops at your door and wants to know if your boy can read flame and not just admire it, whether your heats keep time without singing about it, whether you can run a tighter damper when coal gets stingy and mouths get loud. You answer by moving. Slice, rake, blinker, on beat, a clean skin to the lip, the door trimmed to a frown that keeps the bath obedient. He nods like a man measuring a casket and moves on. Your boy asks nothing. He stands heel to cool brick, toe to hell, and leans forward just enough to prove he belongs to the work. You think of adaptable and decide it has room for stubbornness that pays attention. The open hearth can come when it comes. Today's heat doesn't care about tomorrow's vocabulary. Then the fright you keep steps out of hiding at the slap of a second you misread by a hair. The boil grows shoulders and you're still a fraction deep with the paddle, and the bath throws a blister that decides to be a fist, and the fist decides to open. Sound stops, white. A hot hand slaps your cheekbone and the world cuts to pictures pinned to a wall you can't quite look at. The rod drops, your body doesn't. Short lines belong here. Step back. Don't breathe. Eyes shut. Lid saves pupil. Heel finds brick. Left, not right. That's the cool strip. The boy's hand gets your sleeve and pulls like payday. You let him. The furnace keeps roaring because it never promised to pause for your education. The shop inhales and then pretends it didn't. Someone curses in a language that only burns learn. A rag finds your face and the water is a priest with bad hands. Cold, then pain, then less. You taste iron because fear bled your lip, not because the bath reached you. You open your eyes to a world that arrived half an inch to the left of where you left it. The boy's grip shakes, then doesn't. You squeeze his wrist once and pass the shake back to yourself where it belongs. You check the door, trim the fire a whisper, and look at the bath's skin as if it just told a lie you can forgive this once. You breathe, you count 3 blinks. You lift the rabble you dropped and find the hum again. Then you finish the heat, because finishing is who you are, and because leaving a job mid-boil teaches the wrong lesson to a boy who is still learning which part of him refuses to run. You set the boy's feet the way an old hand once set yours, not with speeches, but with small corrections a body can remember under fear. Left heel to the cool brick, right foot angled toward the door, knees soft as rope that doesn't tangle, hips ready to give and take without borrowing from the back. You place your palm between his shoulder blades and push a breath's width forward so his weight sits where it can move, not where it can lock. Hand grips the rabble like a handshake you intend to keep, thumb laid along the shaft, fingers not strangling but owning, knuckles stacked so a spit glances off iron and not skin. You move him a handspan left to keep his shadow off the slit, then line his chin to the safer quarter turn. He tries to nod. You still his head with 2 fingers, because nodding is how men agree with danger. The lesson lives in where he stands and how he breathes before we ever open the door, and you make him repeat the posture until the floor remembers him. The pull that saves wrists happens before pain remembers its name. You slide the rabble under the crust, lift a thumb's breadth, roll the wrist so the skin parts where you want, not where the bath thinks it can win, then fold with the elbow close, never flung because a long lever makes foolish promises. You repeat it twice slow, once quick, and then hand him the rod because a lesson that stays in your mouth won't live in his bones. He copies badly and you praise the parts that were right. The elbow kept home, the lift small, the blink on beat. Then fix the rest by nudging his hip, not his pride. Show the short pull that saves breath for later, the pause that lets the roof finish, the step that takes his shin out of the triangle that eats ankles. Add one caution about hands above heart when stepping back. Blood cools slower than pride. When he asks, how much is enough, you answer. Enough to keep the roof an earning, not enough to make the throat your partner. Gallows quip rationed. That ache in your forearm is tuition, not failure. You explain with a joke because jokes are hooks that carry weight when minds are slippery. You tell him sunscreen is the wet rag he forgot and that fashion here is anything that keeps your eyebrows attached. Then reach past the punchline and show the rag trick for lids. Dab, blink, dab, not warmly wipe. Because wiping grinds grit into the soft parts you'll fail without. You loosen his gauntlet a hole so blood in his hand can turn corners, then tighten the apron tie so it chooses him over the door if something grabs. You trade him the paddle and make him feel its face catch the beast's breath, not its brag, then swap for the slice and show how to whisper through a scab instead of arguing with it. Finally, you point out the peg where panic will want the tongs and make him hang them there 3 times without looking. Lessons like these look like tidying, but they are architecture for living through noon. Tilt the cap brim into the spit's path, you say, and tuck the rag's tail under the strap so it doesn't turn into a fuse at the wrong second. Reading the ripple is where craft stops being instructions and starts being eyesight that learned manners. You hold the paddle at the bath's edge and let him study the skin when carbon is surrendering, how the surface breathes in slow exhalations that lift and set, and the streaks walk from glassy brag to honest dull. You tip a ribbon of sand where slag tries to root and ask him what the flame tells him about appetite. He says white, and you ask what kind. He squints, picks even, and you nod because names matter when hands get busy. You tune the damper a finger's width and make him hear the pitch change down the flue, the way the roar loosens when the roof is doing work instead of the throat picking fights. You have him close his eyes while you cool the soundscape. Hammers bark, presses quiet grudge, rollers cards in spokes rattle, so brightness can steal his sight without stealing his place. Throw a pinch of scale and make him smell the change, sweet metallic edging out sulphur's sulk. Craft, you tell him, is attention with a memory, and the grace to shut up when fire speaks. He makes the mistake you expected, a reach too long that drags the bath into the flame's raw throat, and the door spits at him with petty accuracy. Fleck on cheek, fast, hot, instructive. You've already turned his face to the safer quarter, and the sting lands where leather and pride can share it. He blinks on beat, looks at you, and you shrug the universal shop sentence. You're alive, so learn. You set his feet again, left to the door, right to the rod, and make him find the cool brick by feel instead of sight. Then, because forgiveness is part of teaching, you lay your hand on his shoulder and let him read the rabble's hum through your palm while you pull, lift, and fold in slow motion until the note steadies. When the slit closes, you give one soft gauntlet clap, the benediction an older man once gave you. In that small sound you hear the day he'll carry you, when your wrists forget their notes. You hand him the scoop for a last neat skin to the lip, and his rake doesn't turn to mess this time, which is how confidence is earned, quietly and under supervision. Dawn on an off day walks slower, as if it distrusts being invited. You take the canal path where warehouses stare with blind windows, and the water keeps its own ledger. Reeds, trash, a pale skin of oil that remembers every ship that didn't come this far. Geese own the towpath with the confidence of men who never met a foreman, necks high, insults loud, and they part for no one of consequence, which is everyone. Your boots find the tamped earths cool, your hands forget the rod and hold a crust of bread you feed to the meanest bird because diplomacy is a habit. Barges sleep under tarps that smell like wet rope and tar. A lockgate drips in the slow language of wood. You count breaths without trying and listen to the city learning how to speak softly. The light tilts along water in a band of tin, and for a minute you let the idea land that you might be important to someone who doesn't care about steel. Then a goose hisses, and you remember your rank. Congratulations, you've been demoted by a bird with a penknife for a tongue. Your Sunday coat goes on like a story you tell kindly about yourself. It has soul and a seam that could use grace. The collar remembers the last wedding it attended by mistake. You brush it with a palm that smells faintly of soap and coal and feel the fabric answer like a dog that chose you twice. It still holds a rumour of the furnace, sweet iron, ash, a memory of heat that clings to the hem the way habit clings to hands. You don't mind, it means the man in the mirror and the man at the door are not strangers. The cap you keep for chapel sits a touch higher. You allow yourself to think you look almost respectable, until the cuff betrays a spark mark that laughs at Polish. Your wife pins a loose thread with the concentrated mercy that fixes worlds, and the boy tries to stand serious and fails because he's new. You breathe the coat in, let the sleeves learn your forearms again, and decide the smell of work at rest is an honest perfume. On the mantel sits the tin cup with the old dent you could hammer out in a minute and don't. It's a record that doesn't brag, a drop on a day your hands missed the peg because the door spit and your feet voted to step rather than admire. The dent holds a thumb, fits a story, reminds you that not everything broken wants to be healed if it can still serve. You pour tea into it on Sundays and taste the way metal edits water, and you choose to like the edit because it is yours. People with clean cups think flavour is a question for leaves and heat. You know dents write commas that make sentences better. On the shelf beside it, a small parade of things that refuse to be rubbish. An odd bolt, a rail off. Cut with letters only you would read, a whistle that wasn't bought. Toe the line like soldiers at ease. You keep them because they weigh almost nothing and mean more than the heavy things you deliver to men who never see where sweat is minted. You admit the mill's beauty in one sentence and hide it after, like a man who lets a compliment sit on his tongue and then sends it home. It is not the grime or the ledger you confess to liking. It's the choreography you can't unsee, the white slit, the low dance, the bloom turning under your hands as if the world agreed to be shaped for a minute. The roar that becomes a speech when the roof is right, the pail that blooms at the centre like a strangely obedient star, the way a rail leaves shouting and returns singing thin. You won't say it out loud because men who praise the fire out of turn tempt it, and because the beauty is made of danger-wearing makeup, but on the canal bank with geese for critics, you let one clean word out, grace. It fits and doesn't embarrass you. Then you put it back with the care you use on tongs, and you walk until the smell of water edits the remembered heats into a quieter paragraph. Night decides to be gentle. You lie down with the window cracked and the alley's secret weather slipping in. Coal softened by damp, soap by the next door's line, onions that want to be stew tomorrow if coins agree. You place your palm on the boy's hair as if to convince yourself the world recurs, and the clock on the mantel makes the same small promises it always does, one beat at a time. Rails Utkins run in your head out of the yard, past stones and hedges, and fields that never spoke to you, toward a sea you haven't seen since you were shorter. You imagine your weekending at water, the line you made diving into waves you didn't, ships stepping onto the plates your paddle persuaded. The thought tucks you in better than blankets, because distance makes dignity simple. You close your eyes with the mills echo 10 streets away, and for once it sounds like rain. You tell yourself you'll wake before the bell and decide to believe it. Whether you do or not, the rails will keep going. That's the bargain, and tonight it feels fair. You take the long way back from the canal, past a brick arch where ivy keeps trying to unionize with mortar, and you let your hand skim the rough as if reading Braille for good news. A barge horse blinks at you with the calm of something that has never seen a furnace. You tip the boy a look that says, "Watch how patience walks." He copies the animal's pace, heel down first, toe soft, and you hear the ghost of your own teacher in the slow. At a bend where reeds whisper, you sit and mend the paddle strap with waxed thread, while the boy skims stones that fail their ambition halfway across. Your wife unknots a parcel, bread, onion, a wedge of cheese with opinions, and the canal air edits the mill out of your lungs in sentences that end kinder. You talk about nothing worth a ledger, a neighbour's cat that thinks it is royalty, a hat that lost a feather, the scandal of a goose with no manners. Small mercies rehearse themselves without applause. Later, in the shared yard where lines of shirts make weather, you oil the apron's tired seams with a grateful palm and set the tongs across your knee to file the burr that wanted to become an accident. The boy holds the lantern while the sky learns indigo. He learns that light belongs to tools before it belongs to faces, and he shifts the flame without being told until the teeth show honest and the jaw closes clean. A neighbour leans over a sill to trade domestic theology, soap first, stew after, and you agree because doctrine is easier when the chores align. Someone starts a mouth organ with 2 notes it can afford. Someone else harmonises by stirring a pot in triplets. You test the filed bite on a scrap bar, hear the right little click, and mark the handle with a cut so panic will reach for it on purpose. Work follows you home, yes, but tonight it behaves. Evening chapel is a quiet room where coal and bread sit down beside psalms and nobody dares ask who carried which. You take a rear bench because your back knows aisles and doesn't trust empty space, and you let the hymn sit on your chest without making your throat do work it didn't agree to. The minister talks about labour and rest as if they were cousins at peace. You nod because you want to, not because you believe him entirely. The boy watches the candle gutters with the same attention he gives the slit, and you hope he keeps that habit wherever heat lives. Afterward, men exchange handshakes that count as treaties. Rollermen who won't say they're tired, shinglers who won't say they're proud, you who won't say you envied the quiet. Outside, a drizzle edits the street into soft chalk, and you walk home with hat brim low and coat guarding the last warm inch above your spine. Even the geese sound respectful in damp. Bed is a machine that takes heat and returns hours, if you feed it right. You feed it with the ritual that fools the day into ending. Boots set side by side like 2 old arguments done for now. Apron hung where morning hands will find it. Rag rinsed, wrung, draped, so it won't mildew into a weapon. The boy places his tin soldier on the mantel with military gravity, and you don't tell him soldiers bend. You let him learn from softer metals first. Your wife pins tomorrow's list near the clock. Coal, onions, a mending needle stout enough to argue leather, a moment for herself if the market remembers kindness. You crack the window a thumb and let the alley exhale. Wet brick, a coach's late complaint, a neighbour's laugh folded in a cough, and the draft makes a bargain with your lungs you can afford. Sleep arrives without negotiation. It takes your hands last. Like a guest who respects the house. Morning finds you before the bell because promises kept themselves overnight. The street is a charcoal drawing waiting for detail. You step through it, a smudge crossing other people's lines, and you feel the mills tugged long before you see the stacks. On the way, the boy asks whether rails remember the men who shaped them. You tell him iron remembers, by behaving, that a straight line kept straight is gratitude, and he accepts it because he's young enough to believe in materials with manners. At the gate the watchman nods, your name a habit his mouth owns, and the yard answers with yesterday's geometry improved by dew. Before the aisle's roar claims your ears, you stop at the post and press a palm to the paddle's face like a man greeting a friend he trusts to tell the truth. The tool is clean, the tongs bite true, the rag is where sanity will want it. You square your stance, you let the morning in, then you open the door and pay attention. Morning doesn't so much arrive as resume. You take your place at the slit like a reader returning to a book that writes itself faster than you can turn pages. Heel on cool brick, toe toward the door, shoulders low. The boy mirrors you without the fidget he used to borrow from fear. You crack the latch and the furnace exhales that hot, coin-tasting breath you know better than weather, and the white inside edits the aisle down to a tunnel the width of your patience. Pig iron noses in, scale shakes its black snow, sand hisses where seams would like to lie, and the slice persuades a sulker into the raft. You trim the damper a finger, and wait for the flue's note to drop from brag to speech. Your wrists hear it before your ears admit it. Pull, blink, breathe. Small wreaths to keep the roof earning. Short folds to keep pride from borrowing skin. A steady palm on the boy's shoulder when his stance forgets the cool brick. The heat recognizes you, it doesn't love you, but it obeys enough to let work begin. Gallows ration. The sun rose inside before it bothered with the sky. The boil grows without tantrum because you've trimmed the fire to obedience, and when blisters lift you're already angled, offering leather instead of cheek. The bath turns heavy kind under the paddle, and you gather a mass that tests your shoulder without winning, turning it in place until bright tears of slag run toward the lip. The boy braces the door with the door's own temper. You nod, seat the bloom, lift, count 3 heartbeats, and clear the sill. Tongs bite where you tell them, not where the weight prefers, and you walk the corridor of clean brick rectangles older men bequeathed with scars. Orange rain plays at your hem, You move the way a man carries a sleeping child and made of the argument. The shingler receives without ceremony, sets the loaf under the tripperhammer's black dog, and grammar returns. Blow, squeeze, turn, blow. Slag jets in lace that snaps to black mid-air, and the scream changes key, from wet pride to workable honesty, and you grade it with a tilt of chin. The foreman's eyes write an unspoken good and move on. You're already walking uphill into noon again, back to the slit. Afternoon is the hour when water forgets its manners, so you remind it gently. Buckets live low, lips skimming. Rags are fed rather than thrown. Steps stay slow through steam that wants to be everywhere at once. Down the aisle, a man hurries a skin to the barrel, and the pop snaps like a trap, white hand leaping up the leg before curses get names. So you and the boy step into the flue's cool wind and haul him sideways by a leather and joke. Laces tear, boot hisses, ankle blooms red like a lesson you wish you didn't recognise. You dose the burn in sips, not gulps, because mercy poured fast turns mean, and you park him in the draft where air can afford him. He laughs too loud, which is consent to belong to his foot again, and the aisle exhales. You reset the bucket on brick with the handle tucked, because handles become snares at bad seconds. You rinse the rag until the water argues soot into surrender. Gallows ration. Congratulations. You've met Steam, the thief that steals without picking pockets. Evening heat tastes brassier, as if coins melted into the flame, and fatigue edits grace into habits you can still defend. You put the paddle in the boy's hands and stand where his mistake will land on leather instead of luck. Coaching with nudges, lift a thumb's breadth, roll the wrist, let the roof finish its sentence, now gather. He makes his first honest ball, not pretty, not proud, but sound. A sticky sun that agrees to be carried without editorial comment. The foreman ghosts by and leaves a single word you can live on for a week. Steady. And the boy nearly smiles before remembering the door is open. You clear the lip, trade paddle for tongs, and walk the corridor again. Rain of orange at your hem, ankles out of the triangle where weight, door, and post conspire. The hammer's bark turns the loaf's scream to sense, and you grade the music by ear while your lungs learn to forgive themselves 1 inch at a time. When the squeeze press leans in, you watch slag rope away clean, and you let yourself imagine a rail already straightening somewhere inside the noise. Twilight past the stacks is softer than it has any right to be, and the yard smells of iron cooling its temper like a brawler remembering home. You shake your hands as if drops of heat could fall from your fingers and leave them civil, and you walk the long way out where rails lie in patient rows like thoughts you might finish someday. A neighbour in the pattern shop lifts 2 fingers. A collier coughs a vote for staying alive. The watchman nods as if the gate were a mouth that knows your name. On the lane, the beerhouse light rehearses its temptations, but you keep your coins in a pocket that already promised bread. Your boots drum a slower meter on the cobbles. Your head keeps the shop's music at a distance where it sounds almost kind. At your door you pause the ritual half a heartbeat and set the day down without ceremony, the way a smith sets a cooling bar. Flat, centred, certain. Inside waits water, onions, a chair, and the boy's quiet asking to try again tomorrow. At home, the night behaves like a decent supervisor, present, not shouting, willing to let you finish your sentence. The kettle fusses, stew says it will wait. The boy produces a drawing of a furnace that looks like a castle with a dragon inside, and you tell him the moat is the slag door, and the drawbridge is the paddle, because metaphors work when wrists are tired. Your wife folds shirts that remember heat, and slaps cuffs into obedience. She argues about the day without asking for its teeth, and you give her the parts that don't bite. You wash at the basin because the tub can stay retired one evening, and the water blackens politely as if not wanting to start an argument. Out in the lane, neighbours trade a whisper about a rent rise that might prefer the word adjustment, and someone's mouth organ tries 3 brave notes of a hymn that never quite arrives. You sit, you eat, you let your bones talk to the chair, and you promise your shoulders nothing except tomorrow. Gallows quip, rationed. The spa is closed. Tonight, we offer the deluxe bowl and hope treatment. Maintenance day sneaks in disguised as ordinary. The hearth's skin is tired, the roof has spat a little brick that isn't supposed to travel, the bed wants fettling, sand, scrap, labour, patience, so that the bath will take a temper and not a tantrum. You and the boy fetch Ganister and old Cinder, ramming the low places with a hammer that knows this hymn by heart. The floor rings a different note, solid, not sulking. The damper gets a look and a scold, the door's hinge earns oil and stops behaving like a violin sawn by a drunk. You feather sand along the working face and scratch a shallow channel where slag can find the lip without guessing. The foreman passes with quiet approval because nothing looks like heroism and everything smells like foresight. In the roll shop, a man offers you a sack of fresh scale with a shrug that costs a pint. You pay because chemistry that arrives on time saves skin. When the first test fire runs, the flame reads even white, the throat speaks sermons not insults, and the roof's reflection sits like a promise you can afford. Bad coal teaches quicker than sermons. Mid-morning, a wagon load sulks into the yard shiny with too much sulphur, and the aisle learns fast what the green means. Temper, stink, gasser that wants to pop in letters you can't spell without blisters. You tune the damper down to patient. You spread pig thinner so the roof does more and the throat less. You lace extra scale like a miser sprinkling coin, and you watch the bath behave grudgingly instead of wickedly. The boy wants to rush the fold. You slow his elbow with a palm and point his nose to the safer quarter. You make him smell the difference between sweet metallic and bitter insult. Across the way, a shingler curses because wet slag keeps flying needles. He tightens the singer's apron and changes the rhythm. Lighter blows, more squeezes, and the jets go from ropes to spit. History in the aisle adjusts to materials like a river, fits a new bend. Everybody shifts half an inch. Everybody mutters a new prayer. And the work still finds a way to claim an afternoon without asking your permission first. The roll train throws a sulk in late light, a bearing running hot, oil smoking like bad gossip, so the bar that should have become a line on a map becomes a curled accusation on the floor. You and the shingler share that look men share when machines choose a new vocabulary. Then you walk your bloom to the squeeze press again, and ask patience to wring out one more portion of grief. While the roller crew tames the hothead with rags and a careful pour of cool oil, you and your boy learn a different choreography, turning the screaming loaf on a table that forgot to be helpful, reading sound without the train's punctuation, timing the lift and turn to the press's slow mercy. Foreman's chalk eyes hover, ready to convert delay into fines, then blink and forgive when he watches you drag purpose from a shop that lost its sentence. The bearing song finally drops from panic to grumble. The train remembers its job. Your bar returns to the world's grammar. You don't cheer, you nod. The aisle understands ceremonies that look like work. When the whistle goes, you step into evening with skin that hums and a mind too full to be loud. The boy walks at your left, exactly where habit says he should, and practices the stance in shadow as if even cobbles might spit. You pass the union room over the bakery, windows steamed, voices low, and you catch a word or two about dues and dignity and the math of missing a day to gain a year. You file the noise where you keep other necessary maybes. At the grocer you trade coin for onions and the promise of meat if the week behaves. At the door you leave your boots side by side like two tired dogs allowed indoors on sufferance. You rub the dented tin cup with your thumb and decide tea will taste like victory without needing to win anything large. The house breathes coal and quiet. The street mutters the way streets do when they've seen men survive another shift. You touch the boy's shoulder with a mercy you don't name and feel him stand taller by 1 safe inch. You step back from the slit in your mind and the aisle shrinks to a line of memory. Furnaces blinking like tired eyes, hammers arguing with silence, men made small and exact by a job that punished the vague. What Puddling built is not mysterious. Rails that stitched counties into conversations, bridge ribs that held towns apart over rivers that once kept them strangers, ship plates that turned storms into stories people lived through. The bill is not mysterious either. Wrists that forgot softness, lungs that kept the shop's grammar, eyes that learned colours the way sailors learn winds. Every rail has a ledger in it. Every rivet remembers a scald your skin voted against and lost. You think of the names that never got stamped, Sooty Tom, Angel Jack, 3-Tap Bill, and how their craft hides inside the temper of iron you'll never meet again. The furnace taught you the finest arithmetic you know. Add a breath, subtract a boast, multiply attention, divide fear by stance. In the cool room where thought finally fits, you're allowed to say it out loud. The work was ugly and it was magnificent. Modern comforts line up like small miracles and you try to name them without gloating. Gloves that don't smoke, boots that shrug sparks, goggles that make lids a backup plan instead of the only one, thermostats that listen when you ask for mercy, fans you can tell to behave, a weekend that pretends 2 days is enough to repair a body's grammar. Somebody somewhere carries a mask that edits the air kindly. Somebody else pockets a badge that says they may stop a machine first and ask permission later. You touch each gift in the language you wish you had back then, a kettle that doesn't taste of coins, a rag that was never asked to be sunscreen, a shop rule written before an accident instead of after. There is no smug way to say it. You worked in a world that trusted luck too much and instruction too little. If you have a switch that quiets heat without writing fines in someone's skin, bless it. If you have a clock that belongs to you on Sunday, bless that too. The craft vanishes and remains, which is a trick you recognise from ash that looks like nothing and hides a coal. Open-hearth will arrive patient and vast. Bessemer has already blown carbon out of iron the way wind scours a hill. Later furnaces will drink electricity and throw light too clean to be believed. They will not need a man to squint and guess by straw and cherry and near white. They will hire instruments that never ask for bread, and yet the stance survives in different rooms. Feet arranged for safety before cleverness, hands that keep tools where panic expects them, a mind that can read a ripple on a surface it did not invent. You trained eyes to hear, you trained ears to see, the next person in the line will train numbers to feel. Work keeps evolving, work keeps being work. Somewhere a gauge replaces a knuckle, somewhere else a knuckle corrects a gauge. You do not resent the quiet. You ask only that somebody remember the cost of learning how to make it. Heat was a teacher that did not lie. It told you the truth in the first second and asked you to honour it for the next 12 hours. Routine became a prayer you could say with your shoulders, heel on cool brick, toe to the door, pull, blink, breathe. You learned patience that wasn't a virtue so much as a tool. You learned that pride, used sparingly, was a handle that let you lift more than you should, and a knife that cut you when you forgot it was sharp. You learned generosity, the only way your aisle allowed, by standing where someone else's mistake would land without killing them, by showing the move that would save a wrist 10 years from now. If philosophy applies here, it lives in simple sentences. Fire speaks, listen, water bites, ask before you offer. Work is a language. Speak it so the boy can repeat it without inheriting your scars. You are not noble, you are exact. Sometimes exactness is nobility in a room that doesn't have time for speeches. So you set down the rabble in the room that finally earns the adjective cool. You hang the tongs on their peg where panic always found them, and thank tools for their one true kindness. They remember you the way you use them. You draw one slow breath that doesn't taste like coins, and the lung that keeps the shop's song begins to hum a quieter key. Rails keep running in your head to places you won't go. That's fine. Distance lets dignity finish its sentence. You tell the boy one last small thing, tilt the cap brim into the spit's path always, and he nods with the grave calm of someone who doesn't yet know what will try to own him, and has already decided to be difficult about it. The door to the lane is a square of ordinary night. You step through it, lighter by a rod and heavier by a week, and let the air have your shoulders. Then you sleep the kind of sleep that doesn't brag, the kind earned by listening well to something that never said your name and still kept you alive. You think about tools as if they were a chorus that learned your name by pitch. The rabble remembers the angle you taught it, the way a wrist rolls to part a crust without letting the bath choose the fault. The paddle keeps the flat it earned against blaze and shove, a face smoothed by arguments you mostly won. Tongs close and open like a patient bird, biting where you point instead of where the bloom insists. Obedience bought by oil and bad language. Even the scoop knows its place. Mouth turned away from the door because you once learned what happens when it faces light. On the bench, the gauntlets dry into shapes your hands invented, and will fit again in the morning without asking whose skin they answer to. You hang each piece where panic will want it, and you thank them in the tongue menus when they're alone. Quiet. Particular. The sort of gratitude that sounds like inventory. Gallows ration. If these things had a union, you'd pay dues and not complain. You count names the way a foreman counts heats, not for ceremony but for truth. Angel Jack, who saw light in slag and once pulled you out by the sleeve as if he were rescuing a thought. Sooty Tom, who taught the quarter turn that keeps cheeks intact. 3-tap Bill, who knocked the rabble twice and never a third time because the third belonged to a bad morning. Shinglers who read screams like music and pressed patients into loaves until iron agreed to behave. Rollermen who fed mouths wider than doors and made rails that turned maps into sentences. The boys who stood heel to cool brick and learned not to blink at the wrong second. You speak them inside because saying them outside would make the room check its exits. Work is a country that stamps no passports and keeps the dead on the payroll in advice and stance. You are rich in ghosts who don't haunt so much as correct your elbow. It's a fortune a bank wouldn't count, and you can't spend except by living. Rails travel further in your head than you ever will in your boots. You follow one out of the yard, past hedges, sheep, crossings, where boys wave hats, into cuts that bite hills down to something trains can argue with. You ride it across bridges your shoulders once helped hold up, over rivers that used to separate opinions, into ports where plates you never touched turn tide into bore to burden and burden into laughter. You let the line keep running while you stand still in an unimportant doorway, and its going feels like proof you existed correctly today. Somewhere a wheel will kiss a length you midwifed, and the kiss will sound like the thinnest song. Oil, metal, speed. 3 notes that say, keep going. You will not hear it with ears. You will hear it with whatever part of you still rings when the furnace door shuts. It's not pride exactly. It's geometry finding a use for breath you've already spent. Modern rooms are full of dials that scold heat into manners and glass that keeps sparks outdoors like rude cousins. And you're glad for people who won't learn your colours because colour has better uses in their lives. Straw can be a hat. Cherry can be a tart. Near white can stay a wall that never thinks about hurting eyes. Let their gloves be boring and their boots unremarkable. May their rags smell only of laundry, not pharmacy. If they talk about fatigue, may it be after a game. If they talk about fear, may it be of a test that accepts revision. Still, if any of them stand close to a bright mouth, forge, kiln, kitchen flame, teach them your one sermon. Heel to cool, toe to heat, elbows home, mouth shut when doors open. It isn't romance, it is survival that fits inside a sentence. You give that sentence away the way a man gives his last match, freely and hoping no one needs it. Finally, the room cools enough to accept sleep without negotiation. You set down the work in the only reliable place to store it. Tomorrow. You say a small grace that names nothing and thanks everything. The rag that didn't fail, the boy who watched, the door that spit and missed, the tea that tasted like coins and still counted as mercy. Your wife turns the lamp trimwise and the shadow of the tin cup's dent climbs the wall. A little mountain you have no desire to flatten. Outside, coal breathes in ordinary paragraphs. Rain edits the cobbles into a softer grammar, and a cart far off makes the patient complaint of wood on iron, the sound all shops understand as you lie on your side so the shoulder that worked can be off duty for once. The last thing you taste is not metal, but bread. The last thing you hear is not the furnace's roar, but a hallway sigh. Then you go where even rails hush, a sleep that doesn't brag and doesn't need witnesses. Seasons write their own footnotes in the aisle. Winter makes the yard shine like hammered tin, and the slag heaps smoke like sleeping animals, and you walk into the glow with breath that looks like the furnace's apprentice. The door's white feels whiter when air bites. Steam behaves more politely because cold teaches it manners at the threshold. Boots harden, leather holds a memory of frost even as it steams. The wool shirt earns its keep twice before noon. Summer erases edges. The roof hisses with a wet impatience and the glare leaks past your cap brim as if the sun were paying rent. Sweat makes maps under the apron. Rags dry to boards and then ask to be rivers again. Tea refuses to cool unless you bribe it with distance. Autumn tastes of coal and apples from somebody's pocket. Spring smells of rain coaxing iron to rust if you look away. The chemistry stays the same. The choreography changes. Smaller doors in July, longer patience in January. Always the stance that keeps ankles negotiable. In winter the boil lifts slower, dignified by chill, and your timing stretches like taffy pulled between 2 patient hands. You feed scale in pinches and hear the flue's notes sit lower, as if the roof were humming to keep itself brave. Summer turns the boil into a mood swing. Fast blisters, quick spits, metal trying to run before it learns its legs. You trim the damper early and keep folds short so pride doesn't boil over. On wet days, steam becomes a prankster that waits under cuffs, then bursts upward when a fleck lands, slapping manners into forearms that forgot to ask. Fog mornings make the aisle smaller and safer until you forget it isn't. And bright frost makes sparks look friendly until they prove they never were. You tell the boy the season is just a longer version of the moment. Read, answer, don't invent. Wind out of the north pulls at the flue and teaches humility. Wind off the canal tastes of iron filings, and fish, and asks you to forgive both. Heat has seasons, you tell the boy, and so do men. Both should be read without haste and argued with only when necessary. Clocks fail in heat, so you learn the softer timekeepers. Tea that turns metal dark too fast means you opened the door too long. Tea that never cools means you have not earned mercy yet. The hammer's bark shifts a quarter tone near noon and tells you how many heats the shingler has left in his back. The rollers rattle, evens after dinner, when oil and patience finally agree to share. Your body keeps the schedule no foreman writes. Wrists begin to argue at the fourth heat and stop at arguing when coin imagines meat. Lids grow stingy at the sixth, and forgive again when you blink on rhythm like prayer. In winter you count by plumes off breath, and the way frost redraws footprints between doors. In summer you count by how often the rag asks for the bucket, and by the salt that dries on your lips and tastes like a bill you already paid. Better to read how scale sifts in the scoop, how cinder skins at the lip, how your tongue dries to copper right before a good gather. You apprentice yourself to these small almanacs until the year turns without asking you to name it. Holidays, when they come, feel like a trick you don't mind falling for. The mill quiets to a rumour, the stacks stop explaining themselves. Men look larger when they are not scaled down by doors that prefer you humble. You dress without gauntlets and your hands look like visitors. Bells you never hear on workdays remember your name and try to persuade you that time can be kind. You walk the rails in the yard and read the stamps the way a penman studies flourishes. Month, mill, heat. You find your letters in the cold and let a private pride sit down beside you, like a dog that behaves when fed. Later there is gravy that tastes of victory earned by onions. Later there is a nap you don't apologise for. You almost forget which foot goes to the cool brick first. Almost. You set your tools out in tidy ranks anyway, as if order alone could earn you an extra day away, and then put them back one by one so their pegs remember them. By evening you are ready to return simply because rest has completed its work. Idleness would only rust the edges you need sharp. When weather truly misbehaves, flood chewing the yard, a gale shoving smoke sideways, frost that turns rungs to glass, the aisle rewrites its commandments. You sand the floor like a priest salting a dangerous stump. You turn every handle inward. You keep tools low and heavy and tempers lighter than rags. The foreman trades chalk for rope, and men become each other's fences on corners where sight fails. You map exits as if you expect to use them, and you rehearse the carry that takes a man with one good foot and one bad idea to safety without dropping either. Coal clumps, flame sulks, doors seize. You answer with patience that looks like stubbornness, and stubbornness that pretends to be calm. When the wind finally tires, you sweep the lesson into a neat pile and leave it by the post where memory will trip over it tomorrow. Later you write new chalk marks at shin height where boots should step when the floor lies, and you scuff a fresh strip of cool brick for the boy, because safety wears out like leather if you don't resolve it. You keep mentoring because craft is a ladder you stand on while building the next rung. The boy becomes an underhand who hears the damper's mood in the flue and knows when a yellow's friendly and when it's betrayal. You hand him checklists you never wrote, heel to cool brick, toe to door, elbows home, mouth shut when doors open, and make him recite them without sound while the slit breathes. You show him how to read a man's day by his shoulders and a furnace's day by its edge colours. When he starts to guess too early, you make him carry the paddle a minute longer, so patience earns wrists. When he starts to guess too late, you give him the rod for the gathia, so failure stays small and persuasive. You let him see you wrong sometimes, on purpose, so he learns to fix things he didn't break without announcing it. Teaching, you discover, is another way of standing in the spit path for somebody else and liking the view anyway. The aisle has a language you didn't invent and will not refine, only hand on. A chin tilt means hold, a palm slice means turn. 2 fingers point to the lip when slag needs shepherding. A knuckle tapped to the post reminds a stance to find cool brick again. The grammar is shared breath. Blink on the pull so sparks meet lids, breathe on the fold so your chest has a reason to return. Superstitions harden into rules when you can afford to call them that. The scoop mouth turns away from light. The tongs hang teeth down with handles pointing home. The ragtail tucks under straps, never free to audition for fuse. A rod never lies on the floor where an ankle will learn to pronounce regret. Men from other isles borrow your nouns: boil, skin, breath, sweet resistance, and you borrow theirs. Dog bark, squeeze sigh, roll song, until the shop's dictionary fits in a hand signal and a boot placement. Congratulations, you're fluent in a language that saves fingers by not bothering the tongue. You inventory mercies like a miser counting coins. The cool brick strip under the door that always forgives one step and never two. The bucket not too full, the handle turned inward. The rag that still manages damp after the fifth prayer. The tea that tastes like pennies and still convinces the mouth it remembers kindness. A joke spent at the right second, small and rationed, that turns a man's panic into breath without letting him call it panic. The chalk that writes a heat halfway firm and then politely looks away while you change the order to suit materials, not pride. The foreman who pretends not to notice because the rail will be straighter for it. The boy's hand that finds your sleeve without asking when the world whites out for a blink, and you need a tug that isn't a rescue, just a reminder. None of this is heroism. It is the tiny economy of a room that buys survival in coppers and pays out in hours still owned at home. Gallows ration, spar package not included. Scars become marginalia that keep you from rereading mistakes as literature. A crescent on the forearm where a fleck declared itself and you answered late. A pale rope at the wrist where a glove seam once camped too long during Steam's sermon. A sprinkle along the knuckles like stars mapping a constellation named Blink on the Pull. They dictate choreography without nagging. You pour water like you're feeding a wild animal. You set the paddle down flat so a stumble won't graduate into a spear. You test with the back of the fingers because skin that sees better than it feels has seniority. These edits accumulate until your body is printable in the shop's font. Letters shaped by heat that no clerk could reproduce and no poet needs to. You do not pity the marks. You consult them like old minutes from a meeting where the only agenda item was keep the next man smarter than we were. They give advice in raised whispers your fingertips hear first. The underhand starts carrying his own boy's mistakes, and your chest does a thing it forgot it could do, open without the door being involved. You watch him move a bloom with tongs that bite where he tells them and hear him grade the hammer's music in a key you recognise as your own, passed through the better lungs. He rakes a lip clean without sunning the bath, trims a damper a finger, and doesn't look at you to see if you saw. In the beer house he keeps coins for bread and leaves when songs try to steal names. In the yard he chooses market over truck and sells rumour to men who need quieter for sleep. One evening he brings you a rail offcut stamped with the mill mark and sets it on the mantel beside your dented tin, as if to teach objects to be lineage. You pretend indifference because the room likes its jokes, then move the offcut 1 inch to the left so the light catches the month better. Pride permitted in one sentence, then back to the door. You walk the mill in your head one last time, an inventory that opens every door without letting out heat. The charging floor is quiet, and in memory, that quiet feels like mercy. The hearth sits with its mouth shut, bricks dulled to brown, a creature asleep but never tamed. You trace the soot-shined arch with a thought and remember where the glaze turned black from breath, where a splash of slag made a comet that still points to an old mistake. Tools hang in silhouette as if waiting for bodies to fit them again. Tongs with patient jaws, a paddle whose face kept its flat by arguing all day, a scoop that learned to keep its mouth turned from light. The sandbin is a dark square, the scale sack a soft hill, the damper chain a line that once conducted sermons from your fingers to the roof. Even the cool brick at the threshold glows in recollection, a narrow country you swore allegiance to with your heel. None of it is sentimental, it is simply exact. A shop is just a dictionary of decisions, and you can still read every word with your wrists. You make a list of what the heat gave you that it did not take back. Patience measured in breaths, not speeches. A calendar written on skin that refuses to forget once the month turns coy. The knack of reading a room by its edge colours and hearing decisions announce themselves 5 seconds before they arrive. A superstition tested until it hardened into a rule and saved somebody else's ankle. Tenderness you could hide inside a joke. palm on a sleeve during the whiteout second when pride would waste oxygen. A taste for tools put away where panic will want them, and for words spent only where noise will not eat them. You learn to pour water like feeding a wild animal, and to stand where another man's mistake would land on leather rather than luck. You learn the mercies worth counting: a rag that stayed damp, a door that decided to spit and chose brick, a foreman who pretended not to see you rewrite the order to match materials. Not ego. These are not medals. They are small currency. They buy the next hour at the price of the last one, and that is as fair as work ever gets. If the past owed explanations, it would write them in slag, and slag refuses grammar, so you settle for stories. There was the hour the door spoke your name and still missed. There was the morning a bloom slipped. And 3 hands, none of them yours, caught it without rehearsing heroism. There was the night roomer walked in as policy and walked out as metal because pay packets signed the minutes. You remember the geese that demoted you on your day of leisure, the tin cup that chose to keep its dent, the rail offcut set on your mantle like a visiting card from a map. You remember learning a dead man's pull from a living wrist, and the way a boy's fingers found your sleeve without asking when the world went white and required a tug. These recollections are not grand, they are practical. They teach the same lesson different ways, that most rescues are small, that pride is useful right up to the edge of accuracy and then fatal, that a stance rehearsed in peace will answer when fear arrives unintroduced. Nothing here is prophecy. It is rehearsal that lasted long enough to look like faith. Someday the furnace will be brick without breath, the hammer a museum with good labels, and a white room will explain puddling with diagrams that cannot smell. That will be fine. Let someone trace straw to cherry to near white with a finger along a caption while their tea cools to the temperature of undangerous. Let them watch a careful film of a bloom, turned by a paddle, whose iron never wins a single argument, and let them leave with eyelashes unsinged. If you are there, you will give them only what translates: heel to cool, toe to heat, elbows home, mouth shut when doors open. You will not sell romance. You will hand on survival packed small enough to travel. Perhaps they will try the tongs and feel how obedience lives in weight and hinge. Perhaps they will think of rail as a sentence somebody wrote by hand. Then the docent will thank them for coming, and the gift shop will sell a card with a beautiful lithograph of a mill that never coughed. You will step outside and bless the clean air and keep your counsel. And now we are back where air does not push and light does not order you around. Step away from the furnace, set down the rabble, let the tongs remember you on their peg. Unbuckle the apron and feel how a body expands into its own outline when straps stop deciding. Breathe cool like someone who paid for it with attention. Listen. The hammer is only thunder made polite by distance. The flue's sermon has shrunk to weather. Rails keep running in your head toward coasts you may never see, and that is not sorrow. It is geometry keeping you company. Say one last small instruction for the road, tilt the cap brim into the spit's path always, and allow yourself the vanity of believing it will outlive your wrists. Then let the room darken to its honest grey. Let the bucket be only a bucket, the rag a piece of cloth, the brick under your heel a square of floor instead of a country with a flag. Lie down, sleep takes the tools from your hands and puts them back cleaned. Morning can find them, tonight belongs to cool. You think about the lads who never chose this trade and the ones who did and were chosen back, because some jobs come looking for your stubborn. Schools will someday teach diagrams of refining, phases and carbon curves and call it metallurgy. You learned those with a paddle long before any diagram, and the lesson lives in your wrists. The town will change its sound, fewer coughs, more looms and cranes that don't need a man to guess heat by colour, and you make peace by deciding progress is craft translated into quieter rooms. If you're lucky, someone will still teach heel to cool brick, toe to door, mouth shut when doors open, because physics doesn't retire when a gauge arrives. You promise to keep telling the ordinary truth. Puddling built miles and ribs, puddling cost eyes and wrists, puddling taught patience and the grammar of breath. The rest of your life, whatever it becomes, will be written in that syntax. When you pick up a kettle, you check the handle as if it might spit. When you open a window, you stand aside as if light could behave like slag. Habit is knowledge with boots on. On a morning weeks from now, you'll walk to the river and find a crowd staring at a ship taking its first argument with water. Bunting bright as a bruise and brass trying to organise pride into a tune. You'll stand 3 men back and listen for a note you know, and when plates speak under strain you will hear your own small sentence inside the larger paragraph. Heat to bloom, bloom to bar, bar to frame, and it will be enough. No one there needs your name, the river doesn't keep ledgers that tidy. A woman will throw a bottle and it will break late. The cheer will arrive early. Some child will ask if ships float because of prayers. You will answer no, not prayers, work, and then amend it. Yes, prayers too, if prayers are only the way a hand learns to be exact. Foam will slap wood, gulls will make grammar of the wind, and in the royal you will make peace with the part of you the furnace owns forever. The part that recognises order hidden inside noise, and is satisfied to have been one quiet verb in the sentence. At home, the mantle makes a quiet museum of the small, unprofitable true. The dented tin, the rail-off cut, the whistle won by choosing market over truck, a stone from the canal lock that fits a palm like a settled thought. None of it would pass an accountant's audit of value, and all of it explains you in nouns you can pick up and dust. Your wife adds to the collection without calling it that, a mended cuff you didn't notice until a slap of steam failed to find your skin. A rag cut to the exact square that covers both eyelids without turning to fuse. A thread card tucked by the clock that means boots will last winter twice. The boy brings home a bent nail he swears is a fishhook, and you let it be one because imagination is also capital. Visitors see trinkets. You see operands in the equation that kept the door from owning your cheek. The mantle teaches what the mill never had time to, gratitude practiced as housekeeping, reverence disguised as ordinary tidiness. The mantle keeps you honest when memory tries to paint with flattering smoke only. You have a private definition of luck that would bore gamblers and comfort engineers. Luck is the bucket not overfilled. Luck is the heel-finding cool brick with eyes closed. Luck is the damper that moves a finger's width when asked politely, not a hand's width when you panic. It is the foreman walking by exactly when your gather needed a witness to exist, and him pretending he saw nothing except the result. It is the boy's hand on your sleeve in the white-out second when time stops charging rent and starts forgiving. It is the day the new coal only sulked rather than lied, and the hour the roll train remembered its job before fines learned your name. People call luck what you call rehearsal repeated, until even fear could not argue with it. You keep the ritual small on purpose. Tap the rabble twice, hang the tongs teeth down, tuck the rag tail. Luck, you insist, is attention paid in pennies, never in notes, and the account is settled nightly with breath you still own. Luck is also leaving early once, so a bruise never learned your name there. When sleep finally takes you, and it always does eventually, like a patient creditor who understands wages, you fall through recollections arranged by heat, not calendar. A flare of white, the slow lift of a sweet heavy gather, the lace of slag turning to black snow mid-air, the dog bark hammer teaching a loaf to sing. Between scenes a canal glints, geese appoint themselves supervisors, your Sunday coat keeps its honest smell, and the boy's stance improves by fractions only a floor could measure. You dream a rail into distance and the dream never ends, it simply keeps going until morning decides to be sufficient. In that sleep your cheek does not sting, your boots do not smoke, and your lungs forget coins. The only weight you carry is a paddle as light as a reed, and even that you set down. You wake to ordinary daylight and decide the story was not mercy, but inventory, accounting of what still belongs to you after the shop took its share, and you turn toward breakfast already taller by 1 safe inch. On an off Sunday you cross the river to look the rumour in the eye. The Siemens-Martin shed is a cathedral of iron and patience, roof trusses like ribs, cranes sliding on rails that never get tired, basins glowing like moons that learned restraint. The air smells different, less sulphur slap, more warm brick and oil, heat that lectures instead of jeers. Men here stand farther from mouths and closer to dials. Their shirts are cleaner and their coughs sound like they might go home early. A man with quiet boots says he reads temperature by numbers and calls the boil a phase instead of a mood. He smiles without apology. You watch a charger swing pig in with a grace no bat could copy, then see the long, even glow settle like a teacher who isn't bored. No one blinks at your cap brim. No one asks about last week's spit. You feel pride argue with relief and decide both can ride in the same pocket for a day. The boy squeezes your hand as if he can feel your wrists trying not to miss what they still own. You stand on a safe gallery while an open-hearth bath thickens towards sense. A man points with a gloved finger and names things you already know in new grammar. Slag basic, bath oxidizing, tap near. Words that wear spectacles and still smell true. A pyrometer reports in digits what your eyelids learned by scald. A chart climbs where your pulse would have counted. Yet you recognize kinship everywhere. Channels scratched where slag can find its lip. Sand feathered along a face, mill scale feeding bite like a miser sprinkling coin. When they tap, the pour is a river too clean to be believed. A bright confession aimed at moulds that wait reasonable as pews, and the floor hums under your boots with an order you respect. The crane travels with a patience no man can fake. The teamer nods as if the glow were only weather. You pocket a flake of black scale with permission you didn't ask for, a souvenir you will not brag about. Progress, you decide, is craft translated into quieter rooms. Back over the bridge you speak change in a language the boy can inherit. You tell him colour will become number, and number will still need a stance, that a gauge can be honest and a knuckle can still correct it, that heel to cool and mouth shut when doors open apply to furnaces with spectacles too. You draw him a map that marries your aisle to theirs, straw to digit, cherry to digit, near white to digit normal. And the part where the wrist says enough, no instrument can replace. He asks if puddling is dying, and you answer the only truthful way. Some days yes, some days it is teaching other furnaces to be less stupid. You show him the flake of scale and call it the same old chemistry with cleaner handwriting. He pockets it the way you hope he pockets the stance, without ceremony, with intent. At the corner you stop him from running across steam rising from a drain. He stops himself the next time. That's how inheritance learns to walk. One avoided burn at a time. Your next week writes a clean page the shop will remember even if no ledger does. You run one of those heats that feels rehearsed by kinder gods. Charge laid like a raft that agrees to become a boat. Draft trimmed until the flue stops boasting and starts teaching. The boil rising without tantrum, because your wrist invites rather than dares. You gather a bloom that tests your shoulder and loses. The boy braces the door with the door's own temper and grins by accident. The tongs bite where you tell them, and you walk the corridor of safe bricks older men left you like a will. The shingler catches the screaming loaf and turns it into grammar under the black dog. Slag throws lace and dies tidy. At the rolls, oil smells like promise instead of apology. The bar sings thin exactly when it should. The foreman shakes your wrist once, rare, small enough, and writes nothing, because nothing needs writing. Before you leave, you score a tiny line on the post with a file, a mark no one will see that keeps your hands from vanishing entirely. Evening closes the circle without speeches. The river keeps its slow sentences. Rails in the yard lie like paragraphs waiting for readers you will never meet. At home, stew practices honesty. Bread remembers air. Your wife threads a mending needle stout enough to argue leather and wins. The boy sets the flake of scale beside the dented tin and decides they are cousins. You step into the lane to listen for the mill's ghost, and hear only rain editing cobbles into softer grammar. The goose patrols like an old foreman, disapproves of everything and lets you pass anyway. You rinse the rag and drape it just so, because tomorrow deserves good tools. You hang the tongs' teeth down and thank them without noise. You lay the paddle where panic will want it and forbid panic by being first. In bed you lie on the shoulder that worked less and let the room cool your outline back to human. Rails run away in your head toward a sea that doesn't need your name. Sleep arrives like a shift bell you're happy to obey. You make one more circuit of the room in your head and touch every quiet thing the way a man checks locks before sleep. The paddle lies where panic learns obedience. The tongs hang teeth down with handles pointing home. The scoop's mouth faces the wall like a child told to behave during company. The rag drapes the peg with its tail tucked, a flag that refuses to catch fire on principle. The cool brick at the threshold waits for your heel, tomorrow without needing you to swear. You think of how many small edits turned a punishment into a practice. The quarter turn that spared a cheek, the habit of feeding water like an animal, the way a joke spent at the edge of fear turns a man back into a worker. You don't bless the furnace, you bless the choreography that kept it from owning your face. Then you put the inventory away, the way you set tools down when the door goes dark, flat, honest, sure, and you let the room be only a room again, not a mouth or a memory with teeth. Your body remembers more kindly than your pride. Scars have turned from speeches into minutes. A crescent that votes blink, a a pale rope that votes untie, a freckle's worth of stars that vote gloves off to feel the rod sing. Wrists that once plotted mutiny now carry the weight by form instead of force. Knees recognise the cool strip by smell. Shoulders measure a day with fewer oaths and more math. You taste less coin in your breath when you leave. You cough less theatre into the lane. You stop counting your worth by how much you outstared the glare and start counting it by how often you taught the boy to reach with a smaller consequence. The foreman's chalk eyes write steadier words on you, but they matter less than the ones the floor writes under your boots. In a mirror that doesn't argue, you see a man exact enough to pass for calm. You keep the calm because it keeps the heat where it belongs, in work, not in your head when you try to sleep. The boy grows into a stance that no longer needs your hand on his shoulder to make sense. He runs a heat with patience you didn't own at his age. He trims the damper a finger and hears the flue drop from brag to speech before you do. He invents a little trick of his own, tilting the paddle a breath at the lip so bright tears find the sill faster. And you steal it without admitting the theft, which is how lineage behaves when it wants to survive. In the beer house he leaves early. At the market he counts onion weight with the same eye he uses on bath colour. In the yard he keeps rumours useful and lets the rest melt. On Sunday he moves your dented tin an inch to the left so the light finds the story better. You pretend not to notice and then leave it there because the edit was true. Pride permitted in one sentence becomes habit. Habit becomes language. Language becomes safety. This is what inheriting craft looks like when nobody is making a statue about it. Change keeps arriving in boots that don't track ash. The open hearth across the river glows steady as a promise and steals fewer eyebrows. A yard downriver runs numbers on watches instead of wrists. A poster outside the union room talks about hours as if they belonged to the men who spend them. You don't sneer at the dials because you recognise compassion when it learns arithmetic. You don't bury the paddle in the garden like a sword, you hang it, where hands can still learn weight. When a cousin asks if puddling is dying, you answer without ceremony. The colour became a number, the number hired a gauge, the gauge asked for a stance anyway. You take the boy to the gallery and let him watch a paw so clean it looks like lying. Then you bring him back to the slit and make him read the ripple again, because literacy in one room translates to the other. You call it progress without applause and pay it the compliment of still teaching heel to cool brick. Evening draws its curtains polite, and you step outside to listen to the yard argue itself to quiet. Rails lie in paragraphs waiting for readers with tickets. The river practices its long grammar. A gull writes rude commentary on the wind and leaves the page without edits. You walk to the canal and allow the geese their old authority. Diplomacy is good practice even on rest days. Your Sunday coat still smells faintly of furnace and you decide not to correct it. You drink tea from the dented tin and let the metal write its comma on the taste. You accept the edit because the sentence is yours. At home, the mantle keeps its unprofitable museum, and you add exactly one object. A small loop of wire bent into a circle by a bored hand, nearly nothing, proof that even scraps can honour forms. In bed, your shoulder remembers the rule about the side that worked less. Rails run toward a sea you may never see, you forgive the distance and borrow its dignity. When sleep finally takes the tools from your hands, it returns them cleaned. The paddle in your dream weighs like a reed. The door opens without threat and closes without insult. The boil rises like good bread and never spits. Slag turns to black confetti that writes no letters on skin. Between scenes, the shop dissolves into ordinary rooms, kitchens with safe kettles, benches with gentle hammers, windows that open onto air that does not cost coin, and you bless them without bitterness. Morning will bring back the honest raw and the white that narrows the world to a slit, and you'll meet both with the stance you taught to someone who can teach it after you. Until then, let the last instruction be small enough to carry into sleep. Heel to cool, toe to heat, elbows home, mouth shut when doors open. Say it once, not as a spell but as a checklist, and let it fade like breath on a mirror. The room is cool, the night is ordinary. You earned both. Now rest.